This podcast is a member of the Place to Be Nation family. Visit us at placetobenation.com. The only place to be in your pop culture world.
No place to hide. No place to run. No place to run. The mutant age has now begun. X-Men, X-Men, it's the day, X-Men, X-Men, coming your way. Magneto's hordes are all the way to pillage, burn, and plunder. But there's one team that will not yield, the team that strikes like thunder. X-Men, X-Men, it's the day, X-Men, X-Men, coming your way.
Hello there, true believers. Welcome to the Hard-Traveling Fanboys. I'm here to talk to you today about Jack Dempsey, the Manasseh Mauler. He used to soak his fists in horse urine every day before he fought, and then he'd hit them with bodacious left after bombastic right, and that led me to create the legendary character Dr. Strange.
So are you doing Burt Sugar, Stan Lee, or Brian Doyle Murray from Groundhog Day?
Actually, a hodgepodge. A Danny hodgepodge.
Oh, the best kind of podge.
That's right. Of all three personas. I have been waiting to drop my Burt Sugar Stan Lee impression on you for a month now, I feel like. And finally I've done it. So now that it's finally here, what are your thoughts?
It was a thing that happened, certainly.
It was the Manasseh Mauler. I did research on this, Nick. I did research just for this impression. The Manasseh Mauler, they called him. He knocked out Jess Willard.
Well, yeah, but you mentioned, it's been, you've been sitting on that for like a month. It feels like it's been a long time since we've had one of these just normal, average, run-of-the-mill hard-traveling fanboy podcasts. Not like the epic adventure that was the 2016 Halfies.
People are talking in the streets. I'm like Bobby Brain Heenan in the 90s. At the airport, people just keep pulling me aside, asking me every day, every week about, have you listened to the Giant Size Hard Traveling Fanboys podcast? Have you listened to the Haffy Awards? And they all want my thoughts, Nick. I mean, people are talking about this. It's getting buzz on the streets.
Strangely enough, they all do it in musical interludes, too, when they ask those questions, featuring
Absolutely.
80s and 90s pop songs.
They played just a few notes of a song from the 80s or 90s and improv the lyrics into questions about the Haffy Awards. But yes, no, this has not been, even though it feels like it has been, this has not been one of our patented hard-traveling hiatuses that we often took in our column over time. No, we hit you with the Haffies, and now we're back with a regular edition of Off the Page, which we haven't done in forever, it feels like, but it's only been a month. This is, of course, the episode in which we will look at a piece of comic book-related media that is not a comic book. It could be a movie, it could be a TV show, it could be a game, it could be a radio serial, an action figure line, you never know. In this case, we're going to go back and we're going to look at a little thing that was called X-Men. Bryan Singer's X-Men, to be specific, from 2000. We were going to line this up with the release of X-Men Apocalypse, but things happened. We shifted our schedule around.
Rebirth happened, mainly.
Here you have it. Rebirth happened, and we did our special edition. So, wow, it really has been a long time since we've done an Off the Page.
Not since the second episode, and this will be episode 11. So
that's about 2 months then.
Yep.
So, anyway, we're back on our normal routine now, although that could always change. You never know when we might throw a monkey wrench. You never know when we might have a final deletion that might interrupt our proceedings. You just never know.
For the record, we're recording this on the evening of the airing of the Matt Hardy versus Jeff Hardy Final Deletion special on Impact Wrestling. And I'm pretty sure that's all Greg wants to talk about. He doesn't even want to talk about X-Men or comic books. All he wants to talk about is this damn Hardy versus Hardy match when he hasn't watched Impact in probably 2 years.
I haven't even desired to watch it in about at least a year, but folks, the Final Deletion could be the greatest moment in the history of our great sport. And by our great sport, I don't mean pro wrestling. I mean life, the sport of life. This could be the pinnacle. This could be the greatest sporting event since the Manasseh Mauler, Jack Dempsey, knocked out Jess Willard in the 4th round after soaking his fists in horse urine.
Well, as you can know, Greg's in rare form tonight, and later on, after we finish recording this podcast, he's going to be watching the Final Deletion. And speaking of watching. You see what I did there?
Yeah.
When last we left you, we had said that we weren't going to review an episode of Preacher because Greg hadn't seen it. So that means right now we're about to hit you with a mini review of the last 3 episodes of Preacher. Those episodes being, of course, Monster Squad, The South Will Rise Again, and this past week's Sundowner. So, Greg, where do we begin?
I guess we should begin at the beginning, which is, 3 episodes ago?
Yeah.
2 episodes ago?
Three episodes ago with the weird chick falls in the mud pit or oil pit subplot.
Yeah, hated
didn't really go anywhere.
Hated it.
Yeah, it was pretty bad.
The worst episode of the show yet, in my opinion.
I don't know. I'd have to think about that, but certainly a low point.
It was that was an episode in which of all the complaints about this show that people have disagreements. Some people agree with us on our tulip complaints. Some people disagree with us on that. The one thing that even advocates of the show tend to agree on is that the pace is glacially slow. And I thought that episode in particular was the slowest paced episode of the series yet, and kind of fell into that pit that sometimes Walking Dead falls into, where it just felt like they were stretching out for time,
And nothing was happening.
Yeah, no character development.
The only thing of note that happens in that episode that I can recall is Tulip and Cassidy kind of beginning whatever their relationship is going to be. The first meeting of those two characters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
wait a minute, that was also the episode in which Jesse commanded the Mrs. Loach character to forgive Eugene, and I'm assuming, even though they haven't said it on the show, that she is the mother of the kid from the comics, Pube, who also attempted to commit suicide with Eugene, but wound up succeeding.
I am not under that assumption. I am under the assumption that Eugene is responsible for whatever has happened to her daughter.
Oh, so maybe he scared the horse and the horse threw her off and kicked her in the head?
Yeah. Yes, I think that's...
No, I mean, like
possible.
I mean, that is my understanding of what happened to her, right? That they said that she got kicked in the head by a horse.
Yeah, that's my assumption, is that that's what happened. Now, you could be right that it could have been Pube that was, bit the dust as a result of Eugene's, or not really as a result of what Eugene did, but along with Eugene, and she blames him for it.
Right.
That could be a possibility as well, but. In any event, it wasn't a very interesting episode. He was the best part, Eugene. He was really good. That actor is doing a great job of creating empathy for the character, which that's one area that they've gotten right from the comics, which is Eugene is supposed to be a very empathetic character, and they've done a good job with that.
Right, I agree. So then we had but that episode also had kind of the foundation of what Jesse and Odin Kincannon's dynamic is. And speaking of Odin Kincannon, you and I have apparently been mispronouncing that name ever since we read Preacher, according to this interpretation of it anyway.
We can just add it to the list of comic book creator names that we've been mispronouncing over the years that we heard on Russell's podcast, such as David Aha, which I once said as a joke, and apparently is the actual way that you pronounce that guy's name. So,
or it could be this might be our version of Jeremy Reynolds' Rorschach.
Yes, the legendary Jeremy Reynolds pronunciation of the Watchmen character Rorschach as Rorschach. Those were the days. Jeremy,
those were the days.
We need to have you on the podcast to explain yourself on that one. Anyway, yeah, so that episode sucked, but they followed it with what, in my opinion, was the best episode yet, which was... What was the name of it again? The South Will Rise Again?
The South Will Rise Again, yes.
I thought that episode was amazing from beginning to end. The Saint of Killers subplot.
Yep. Making that turn to that, yep.
They brought that back and honestly should keep it.
It should open every episode.
Every episode, I completely agree. Although this week's open was really good too.
But we'll get there, yes.
Get there. But yeah, the Saint of Killers stuff, I thought the second Saint of Killers intro was even better than the first.
Yes, what's interesting, because I've been going back and rereading some of Preacher, as the show has been airing, and it seems as if they've combined the villainous preacher character and the McCready character into one character, so that he has one nemesis rather than two, like he does in the comics.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's at least that's the feeling I get based on the most recent Saint of Killers flashback, anyway.
Yeah, it was just a great, powerful scene. When he goes all the way back, he rides all the way back into town to try to save that family, and then the family are just pretty much scumbags like everybody else, you know?
Right.
And then in that little delay, costs him his family, essentially.
Yes.
Just outstanding. And as Russell and I were discussing on Facebook, I would gladly watch a Saint of Killers miniseries if they wanted to put one out.
Right.
Because that's missing on television. So anyway, that was great. But then the actual episode was outstanding from beginning to end. And what about that ending? I don't know if we want to spoil the ending, but the ending with Odin Kincannon, I have to say, I did not see it coming at all.
No, nor did I. So what do we, like, so we're going to have to delve a little bit into spoiler territory here, but, so at the end of the previous episode, Monster Squad, Jesse used the voice on him to command Odin Kincannon to serve God. And throughout this episode, The South Will Rise Again, you have Odin seemingly turning over a new leaf. And then at the end of the episode, he brutally murders 5 people in cold blood. So what's your feeling on what's going on there? I'm thinking that maybe in his own twisted mind, he is serving God. And that's,
right.
That's
what I think as well. I think in Odin's mind, it is serving God to commit these acts. And perhaps, who knows, this may even be the first indication that they're going to use the God character in the way that he's used in the comics, which is as a villain, essentially.
Yes, a guy who's there who influences various characters to warn Jesse away from taking certain actions. Right.
So perhaps this is God's way of trying to tell Jesse not to use the power.
Right.
So, but it was a great scene. It was an amazing scene, and Jackie Earle Haley is just killing it as Odin. Wouldn't you agree? I would
absolutely agree. I've also kind of started enjoying the Angel characters as well. I find the more foreign of the two very very quirky, and there's just something about him I find funny, the way he carries himself. So
yeah, no, it really picked up steam with that episode. Really delivered in a major way, and also they started I thought that episode was the best that Tulip has been on the show. They started the Tulip and Cassidy romance, I guess you would say, or affair, if you want to call it that.
Some sort of romantic triangle being set up here.
Right. And so I really dug it. And it's interesting, we spoke about this briefly offline. It seems as if they're almost telling the story in reverse for Tulip. Because they're doing the Cassidy story, the Cassidy relationship very early, whereas it happens near the end of the book, Preacher. They're going ahead and doing the Cassidy thing. They started her out as this rough around the edges, kind of mean, smarmy person, and it feels like they're trying to build her on an arc of redemption, if that makes sense.
They're trying to slide her back a little bit, I think. What with they've been doing, what is it, the friendship with her and the Emily character, who, in this episode that we're talking about right now, she kind of acts like a giant creepy bitch by just busting in on her while she's using the bathroom, asking her where Jesse is, and then in the following episode, Sundowner, they kind of start to attempt to set up some sort of friendship between those two characters.
True, which was a little clunky in my opinion.
A little clunky, but I can appreciate anything that at least attempts not to portray Tulip as a massive bitch, because to this point we've been given little to no reason to actually care about her or empathize with her in any way.
And in fact, in the most recent episode, it had the worst Tulip scene yet, which literally made me want her to be killed on the show. When she breaks into Emily's house, throws something at her, and literally says this god-awful line of, "Stay away from my boyfriend." It seriously sounded like a deleted scene from Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
It was pretty bad, but to their credit, I think they were trying to show that the character is is a little unhinged and immediately regretted the decision because they then had her not apologize, but in all actuality, she was apologizing and attempting to repair the damage she had done.
Right, but only after being confronted by Emily with the fact that she broke her kid's art project.
Her art thing, as she so eloquently put it.
Maybe don't break the art thing in the first place.
I agree. I
don't know. Like, it's just a version of Tulip that I can't comprehend why they are. I know you want a quote strong female character. You can do that without making her be an asshole to everybody.
I agree.
But
I will say that I think they've made slight progress with that character, and it's still a version of the character that I don't really have any affinity for, but I feel like they're attempting to backtrack it a little bit as the show goes along, and eventually, hopefully, maybe we'll get to something that more resembles the character as she is in the comic.
Yeah, Ryan says definitely maybe, so we'll see. But I thought the episode overall was good, though. The intro was phenomenal. The first, about the first 5 minutes where they're in the hotel room, Jesse and the two angels.
Yes.
Amazing.
And they're fighting the third angel, and the way they've portrayed it on the show is that these angels can be killed in their mortal form, but they just immediately come back. And so as the fight is going on in the hotel room, there are just bodies stacking up around the room.
Stacking everywhere, and teleportations back into the room.
Yes.
It was a great scene already, but the moment that got me is when as you put it, the more foreign sounding of the angels puts his ear to the wall, and he starts to say, I think she's... And then you see the Seraphim angel punch him right in the groin, right through the wall. At that point, I started busting out laughing, and I just laughed. I put this on Twitter. I literally laughed uncontrollably through the rest of the segment, including the amazing scene when they're trying to restrain the Seraphim, and Cassidy shows up and screws everything up, and they just get right back to it.
And Cassidy shows up, shoots the Seraphim in the head, and then the Seraphim shows up again, and he goes, "Oh, bloody clones!" Playing off a continued running gag of Cassidy's involvement with these angels.
Yep.
The show.
And then it zooms out of the room, and all you hear is all the confusion of them fighting each other, and you hear Cassidy say, "Watch out, he's gonna electrocute you."
Cassidy continues to be the best part of the show, by the way.
Oh, outstanding.
I did think it was a little weird in this episode that after having such a big Odin Kincannon moment to close the previous episode, we don't see him at all in Sundowner. I thought that was a weird decision on their part to kind of put a halt to that subplot for an entire episode.
Instead, they focused more on the mayor character,
Miles.
But the other thing that I did like about this episode, I say I liked it. It really upset me, but I think that's a good thing because it's good for me to have that kind of a reaction to something on the show. Again, I'm not gonna spoil it because it's the most recent episode, but Eugene's character arc really caught me off guard. What they did, that was another legitimate shocking moment that was really cool, and not cool because I didn't want it to happen, but it was interesting and it caught me off guard, which is hard to do. So
absolutely, my only concern with it is that we've talked about it's difficult to empathize with Tulip, and it's hard to find her likable. I don't want to see them take Jesse down the same road. We have to be able to like more characters than just Cassidy on this show. Right. And Cassidy is a character that we like despite all the reasons we shouldn't like him, we need somebody to actually be, there has to be one of the good guys because there's far too many of the bad.
Yes, thank you. And I'm cool with Jesse screwing up. Jesse screws up constantly in the comics too, but I think in this episode he started to almost turn the corner of he knows that what he's doing isn't right, but he's doing it anyway.
Right.
So I think that's going to be an issue if it continues going forward. But perhaps the Eugene moment will be his turning point where he realizes, this is not to be.
Right. But to sum it up, I think we both agree that the Monster Squad episode was not very good, but the show seems to have found its footing over the last 2 weeks finally, and it seems like they're setting up.
Yeah.
It seems to be the central conflict of Jesse struggling with how best to use this power and eventually coming into conflict with Odin Kincannon. That should play out over I think we got, 4 more episodes to go, I think? Is that correct?
Something like that, yeah. It almost feels like they reached a point after that episode where they were like, okay, we've been moving at too slow of a pace. We need to pick things up. And it feels like they've finally picked things up. Things are moving in a forward direction. They've been really entertaining. And again, most importantly, this is the important thing about Preacher, because it's the nature of this series. Not everything is going to hit, but so much stuff happens that if there's one subplot that doesn't work for you, there's something else going on that does. And I think the show's starting to figure that out and starting to settle into its groove. And I've really enjoyed it the last 2 weeks.
Absolutely. So, yeah, we've got 4 more episodes. It's a 10-episode season 1. They just wrapped up episode 6, so we've got, we'll do, the last episode will air on July 31st. So by the end of this month, we will be looking back at the first season of Preacher. So that ought to be interesting.
Yep. And as for me, I have also been watching Daredevil season 2 recently. When last we spoke, I was on I had finished episode 4. Since then, I've watched 5, 6, and 7 in the last about 5 days. And yeah, really, really good stuff, as you would expect. There continue to be certain things that I don't like about this season compared to season 1. For instance, Foggy. If you remember, Nick, a lot of people last year said that Foggy was one of the things they didn't like about season 1. They said he was annoying or what have you, and you and I didn't feel that way. At least I didn't.
No, he kind of grounded the show in a lot of ways. He was a little bit of the point of view character.
Agreed.
If there was one on the show. And much needed comedic relief at times.
Agreed. Now, this season, they have made him pretty annoying, in my opinion. Like, he is no longer the comedic relief. He's now there to complain and whine and moan and blame Matt for every problem in life, basically. So I'm not a huge fan of Foggy this season. Karen, I go back and forth on. Some episodes I love her, and some episodes I want to know why they're cutting onions in front of her constantly, because she's always on the verge of crying about something. But all that being said, I'm still enjoying the season. I really, really love John Bernthal's portrayal of the Punisher. After the first few episodes kind of got it wrong, in my opinion, I really enjoy his portrayal. I really enjoy I don't know who the actress is that plays Elektra. She's doing a good job. The fight scenes continue to be excellent. I like the dynamic, especially the dynamic when Daredevil's in costume fighting with Elektra against thugs is really good. And again, I'm not really spoiling too much. You knew all this stuff was coming, so.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish I could comment more in depth on this, but I haven't even finished Jessica Jones yet. But I'm hoping to do that in the coming weeks. I got the wife and kids going out of town for a week, so I'm going to have some television watching time finally. So hopefully in the next few shows I should have some thoughts on Jessica Jones when I finally finish that, and maybe even some Daredevil stuff. So we'll see.
Yeah, it's been good, and then you can probably fit in the Final Deletion too while you're at it. And
maybe
in any event, that'll bring an end to our What You're Reading or What You're Watching segment. And now we need to get on to the much more bloated, and hopefully we'll make this quick, but the What You're Reading segment, because this goes back
2 weeks.
2 weeks now.
Now, to be fair, it shouldn't be too bloated, because last Wednesday was a very scant release date for comics. It was kind of, they dumped some annuals there. Marvel had a couple issues, but DC mostly didn't have much going on last week. So hopefully we shouldn't take too long on this.
I don't even remember what came out 2 weeks ago.
Well, that's convenient for you, because I happen to have my books right here in front of me. So 2 weeks ago would have been the second batch of Rebirth #1 titles. Not Rebirth specials, but the actual #1s that came. So we got Flash, Wonder Woman, and Aquaman #1s all. And then we also got the second issues of Detective Comics and Action Comics back in their original numbers. So Detective 935 and Action 958. And then we also got the 52nd and final edition of Justice League before it relaunches at #1 next month. So, where would you like to start out of that list?
Oh, man. Well, I don't know. I mean, let's start with the one that is probably the most, prominent which would be Wonder Woman by Greg Rucka and Liam Sharp. Wonder Woman #1. This is a prominent book for a couple of reasons. First of all, the fact that it is Greg Rucka's formal return to the character after the Rebirth special, his return to writing Wonder Woman monthly or
bi-monthly,
semi-monthly,
whatever the term is, every other week.
And Lee Sharp making his debut on Wonder Woman to great effect. And this is also one of the books that ties most closely to the actual Rebirth issue, DC Universe Rebirth #1. Right. The book was it's going to be, I think, a divisive comic in some ways. Everybody seems to be loving it that expected to love it, but I think it's going to be divisive in some ways because it is a little heavy on relying on the fact that you've read the Rebirth issue and the DC Universe Rebirth issue. But that being said, I thought this was an excellent comic.
It is. It was an excellent comic. And carrying over a theme from the Rebirth special, I mean, there's more action in this issue than there was in the Rebirth special, but this is still mostly a dialogue-driven book. It still feels to me like the most literary of all the Rebirth titles, and I think that's in a good way. I mean, this has been... I loved the art, absolutely. I loved the characterization of Diana. She's kind of walking through the jungle, and she's talking to somebody who you can't see, and she keeps telling the person... she says something to the effect of, I am in the habit of giving 3 warnings. This is your first. And she gives these 3 warnings throughout the course of the issue. And then, after she gives the 3rd warning, on the final page, we see that all along she was talking to her longtime arch nemesis, the Cheetah. And she reveals that as part of her conflicted identity, she has lost the ability to find Themyscira. She can't go home. And for some reason, the Cheetah, she thinks, is going to be able to help her with that. And so it seems like the conceit of the present-day story is going to be Wonder Woman and Cheetah setting off to find Themyscira once again.
Yeah, and the way that it played out is, again, not a whole lot in terms of action, but it set the stage and it introduced you to all the major players that we need to know going forward. Diana, Cheetah, but especially the side characters, the supporting characters that are key to any superhero book. Etta Candy, who has long time been a liaison for Diana with the government. And then Steve Trevor, who, of course, is out in the field. And I thought that was actually one of the finest scenes in the book was Liam Sharp's rendering of Steve Trevor to see the fact that he is still hung up on Diana after all these years to a degree, and then also the facial expressions when Steve Trevor, who's on a mission for the government, gets to this village that they're trying to stop this warlord who has been terrorizing the village. And he gets there and he kind of realizes the actual what's going on. And the facial expressions were really well done by Liam Sharp. This was the first real exposure I've had to Sharp's work. And I was
mine as well, yeah.
Very impressed. Rucka, I think literary is a good word to describe it because you can tell Rucka's a skilled novelist because it does feel literary at times. And it feels thoughtful. It feels like there's a long-form game being played.
Right, and it looks like there is. So that makes me hopeful that Rucka is in it for the long haul and will be around for quite some time to tell Diana's story. But as great as Wonder Woman was, I think we both agree that probably the best book of a couple weeks ago would have been Aquaman #1. Is that a safe assumption?
It was tied for me. It was tied for me.
Oh, what a cop out!
Or another one, but it was
and not a Bruce Willis, Kevin Smith comment.
No. It was excellent. This is, of course, we are referring to Aquaman #1 by Dan Abnett and Brad Walker on art.
Right.
And a shout out to, I don't know who the colorist is. I don't have the issue with me right now, but one of my friends is borrowing it actually. But the colors were fantastic throughout the issue. Just the art in general was fantastic from Brad Walker. Some of the best Aquaman art that I've seen since Ivan Rice was drawing it regularly. So,
right.
Shout out to that. But just another sign of Dan Abnett's mastery of this character and his world.
Right. I mean, it had great scenes with, Mira continues to be to me the standout star of the book, right up there with Arthur, if not even surpassing Arthur at times. You had some great scenes with I've forgotten the name of the British liaison, the naval liaison character. Anyway, she's a fairly new character that I've really become endeared to over just the course of a couple issues. So I really like what they're doing with her. And then they introduce a new Atlantean character that you and I both were very high on, only to kill him off like 6 pages later.
Yeah, Captain Sark, an excellent character who I was really intrigued by. And he didn't make it long. And then, again, not going to spoil this for those who haven't read it because it's a doozy of a twist. The incredible mustachioed Daily Planet reporter who, if you pick up the issue, all is not what it appears. But the man who says "wowzers," the big reveal at the end was tremendous. The book also, coincidentally, did a great job of reestablishing Arthur's enmity for his longtime foe Black Manta, who is being presented as just the ultimate, as the Sinestro to his Hal Jordan. Phenomenal. Right. Outstanding.
Yep.
Can't say enough about the way that these guys are handling this character and his world. I'm excited to read it going forward. I think that people are buzzing about Aquaman for the first time in a while, and I think it's pretty cool. So,
absolutely. So then we should probably touch on the other one from a couple weeks ago, which you and I both, and it's tough because the Rebirth books for the most part have been so great. When we come across a book like this that we just think is kind of okay, it makes it sound like we think it's a bad book, and we don't. I mean, so what we're talking about here is The Flash #1. And much like the Rebirth title, I think you and I both ultimately enjoyed the book, but compared to its Rebirth brethren, I think it's clearly, from my standpoint anyway, the low spot totem pole.
Yeah,
right
I would agree. I mean, again, it's not a bad book by any means. It's a solid book, maybe even a good book, but in a field that includes really good books and even great books, you can't just be pretty good and make the cut for me. So I don't think Flash is going to cut the mustard for me going forward, depending on what else I pick up and like this month. But the art's just a little bit wonky for me. Like it doesn't It doesn't quite convey the sort of kineticism that I'm looking for in a Flash book.
Yeah, it doesn't have that smooth quality to it that I kind of want. It's fine. It's not bad art by any stretch of the imagination. It's just, I don't know, the entire approach to this book just kind of throws me off.
Right,
a little
I
bit.
agree. I agree. It was just different. The writing was not. Again, it's not bad. I think he writes the Josh Williamson, I think is his name, right? He writes very well. It's just I don't necessarily care for the overall plot, I guess, if that makes sense. Like, I didn't find plot particularly interesting. They retreaded Barry Allen's origin again, which I thought was
which they just did in the Rebirth,
which I thought was unnecessary at best. I just don't know how much can be mined out of another storyline where a bunch of people get speed powers. I mean, it's been done many times before. And
so many of these Rebirth titles seem to be taking their characters back and doing something with their arch nemesis to begin with. And I, for one, would have loved to have seen something with Flash and the Rogues.
Right. And who knows?
To reintroduce a new audience to Flash. And I just...
Perhaps this Lightning Storm is in some way related to Eobard Thawne, and this will be tying in him. I don't know. But, it's I don't know that it necessarily hooked me enough. And it had 2 issues to do it, Rebirth and #1. Right. I just don't feel like I'm hooked.
Right, and that's how I am. Not that it's bad, but like there are so many books that I'm buying over my monthly limit right now. I've got to drop something at some point. So I've got to kind of have an itchy trigger finger, and I think The Flash is the first of the Rebirth series that I'm officially, moving on from. And I'm certainly interested in, picking it up at some point in trade and seeing what the developments are, but I just can't justify $6 a month on this book because it is one of those bi-weekly, semi-monthly, semi-weekly, twice a month, every other week titles.
Easy for you to say.
Indeed.
And so I guess that leaves us with, first of all, Justice League number 52, which was the last issue of the New 52 Justice League run. This one written by Dan Jurgens, and let me look at it here. Nope, that's the wrong issue. Written by Dan Jurgens and art by Tom Grummett. Is that correct?
I wouldn't know because you're echoing so far because you're leaning away from your microphone.
Art by Tom Grummett. Is that correct?
There we go. That's much better. Sure.
Yes. This is basically a precursor to the Superman books in the new Rebirth era.
It feels mostly like a prelude
Yes.
to Action Comics because it's dealing a lot with Lex Luthor, who is going to play more of a role in action than he is in the main Superman.
Yes,
title.
this book basically outlined Lex's reasons for putting on the S and trying to
and leaving Apocalypse when he had basically been installed as the new Darkseid,
the
new
god of Apocalypse, right? And deciding to become Superman, basically. I thought it was really good. Another shockingly good fill-in issue of Justice League, which I was not confident would happen. I think you and I both were thinking, why are these issues even coming out? And 51.
It really did feel like just a ploy by DC to get to that 52 number, which they were so intent
and the
on.
credit of Dan Abnett from 51 and Dan Jurgens in 52, they found a way to make both of those issues feel like they were essential to the story. So, good job. And for me personally, I enjoyed this issue, especially to see Tom Grummett on art, because a lot of people may not remember him, but he was kind of one of the unsung art guys from the Triangle number era of Superman during the Death and Return era in the early 90s. He worked on Superman for several years and also famously drew the Superboy series when it first started after Return, in the leather jacket era of Superboy, basically. And he was always a very good artist. I loved his art on Superman. I love just how smooth and consistent he is. And having him back drawing these characters again was wonderful. And I really hope that DC finds a way to get him regular work, because he deserves it. I mean, that style of art kind of drifted out of style at a certain point in favor of more like sketchy, more, I guess you would say, cartoony style drawing. And I really like the fact that it kind of brought it back in this issue. So for me, the issue worked really well. What did you think of it?
Yeah, I enjoyed it as well. Like I said, it does read to me as mostly a lead-in to Action Comics, but that's fine because Action Comics has been good enough that I found it interesting. So it gives you a little bit more backstory with what the deal is with Lex and kind of explains his dynamic going forward. So with all that being said, I guess we should probably discuss Action Comics, which once again this week it was just great. It's really cool to see, because the few issues of Superman I've read over the last 10 years or so, I'll say, I don't really feel like DC has very often taken advantage of what should be the distinction between the main Superman title and
Right.
Action Comics. It has felt like at times like Action Comics was just an excuse to do a second Superman story that was, for all intents and purposes, largely the same kind of Superman story you would find in Superman. This, however, after Rebirth, it seems like Action Comics is living up to its title in that it is an action story first and foremost. It also has great character moments. It also has some character development, but the main thrust of the book thus far has been the action, which is good because there's not really anything else like it on DC's shelves.
No, I agree completely, Nick. And you really took the words out of my mouth, because it is different and it is taking advantage of what Action Comics should be, which is an action comic. The same way that Detective Comics in general should be a detective-based comic. This is a book that is continuing to not surprise me, but please me every time I read it, because it feels like Dan Jurgens is 30 years old again. Like he's recaptured the kind of energy and the kind of voice that he had when I was a kid and he was writing my favorite comics at the time. The writing has been good. The plot is moving forward. It's not Shakespearean dialogue, but it's good enough dialogue for a superhero book, and the plot is very good, and the mysteries are genuinely intriguing. Continuing to build the Mr. Oz character, continuing to build the mystery of who this new Clark Kent is, about who what Lex's motivations really are, about why Doomsday's there, all these different mysteries layering on top of each other. And the art from Patrick Zurcher, dude, like that guy draws one hell of a Superman.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. He was really good during his Green Arrow run, so I was glad to see him get, what would, in theory, be a higher profile assignment.
Yeah,
so,
it's been great, man. It was actually tied with Aquaman for my favorite of that batch. And again, a lot of good books.
And Wonder Woman, because you couldn't pick between those two
Wonder
earlier
Woman.
as well.
Wonder Woman was excellent, but Wonder Woman to me was just a notch below Aquaman in action for me. But they were all great. But yeah, Action is killing it right now. So big fan of what they're doing with all the characters there, and it pairs nicely with what they're doing in Superman, which is a more slowed down character based story.
Right. And you mentioned that this book isn't really surprising you, but I think a book that has surprised you a little bit is Detective Comics, which is kind of the last DC book we're probably going to talk about.
Unfortunately,
another just outstanding.
And unfortunately, I haven't read it yet. I have not been able to get it. It was not on my pull list, so I'm going to have to try to find a way to buy a copy of it off the shelf if I could find one. But carry on. Just talk about the quality of it.
No, it was very good. It gives you, kind of sets up what the team dynamic is going to be, and kind of sets up what seems like it's going to be the Batman version of the Danger Room almost, which I hope we see more of going forward, and kind of what the dynamic is for Batwoman in terms of training this team. So I don't want to say too much because you haven't read it, but I think as much as you enjoyed 934, I think you'll enjoy 935. If you don't enjoy it just as much, I think you'll enjoy it a hell of a lot, and it'll keep you hooked on this Detective Comics story, which is great in that. We talked about Action Comics should be an action book. I won't say this is a detective book first and foremost, but at least it feels different than the main Batman title. And it's providing us with another type of Batman story that we probably wouldn't see in the main title.
Right. No, that's great. I'm looking forward to it.
And then, just a few Marvel books I want to hit you with that I've read the last couple of weeks. Mighty Thor #8, which was outstanding, if only because it was the first issue that did not have any Rafa Garris art in a couple months. So, ding dong, the witch is dead on that one. And we get back to the Russell Dauterman stuff, which has been very good. We start to move the plot forward again finally a little bit. Get some interesting stuff with Jane Foster and kind of what's going on with her. And a new kind of friendship that she's developing with a previous Thor love interest, Ra Solomon. So, very much enjoying that book going forward. And it looks like they're getting ready to finally answer the mystery of what the Odin son, which I hate that we even have to call him that, what actual Thor has been up to all this time. So very much looking forward to seeing where that book goes. Now that Rafa Garris is gone, back up in terms of quality. Also picked up Darth Vader 22. We're nearing the end of this series. I hate to see it go, and yet again another outstanding issue.
Yeah.
Kieran
You
Gillen
hate to see it go, but do you love to watch it leave?
No, I don't want to see it go or leave. Kieran Gillen continues to have a mastery of, Vader and the Emperor in a way that a lot of writers who have attempted to write those characters in other media, not that weren't the movies, haven't had. So I love this book so much, and I don't want to see it leave, but I'm very amped up to see how they wrap up these loose threads over the last few issues. And then finally, a book that I just absolutely loved this month, Brian Michael Bendis doing issue 5 of the Miles Morales Spider-Man title that is just adjectiveless Spider-Man. The only problem with this book is that I'm a little confused as to what the dynamic is with the 616 version of the Black Cat. I'm used to my Ultimate version, and so I did not know why the Black Cat was a crime boss, which she was, and I didn't understand why she was wanting to hunt down and kill Spider-Man or anything.
Yeah, I don't know any of that either. The last time I read 616 Black Cat, she was a good person, and she was trying to, good in that she was trying to convince Spider-Man to have an affair with her. But, she liked Spider-Man. She loved him even.
Right. And so, that part was confusing to me, but the book was mainly great because it had, it continues to have a great dynamic between Miles and his best friend Ganke, and a new supporting X-Men character that I wasn't aware of. Greg, maybe you know. Are you familiar with the character of Gold Balls?
Gold Balls?
Gold Balls, which is just fun to say,
I'm
by the way.
familiar with an individual who lost his Winky in an unfortunate schmelting accident, but no one named Gold Balls.
Goldballs is apparently a C-list X-Men character, teenage X-Man, who, in true Bendis fashion, because Bendis did this in Ultimate Spider-Man back in the day with Kitty Pryde, where he took an X-Men character that wasn't being used in Ultimate X-Men and moved him over into Peter's world by putting Kitty at Peter's high school. They've done the same thing here with this character of Goldballs, who I've never heard of, who has been moved over to Miles and Ganke's high school, and they're setting up an interesting dynamic with potentially a third member of that friendship group, who's interesting to me. And then, but the biggest thing I'm excited about with this book, they set up the storyline going forward, which seems to be a Jessica Jones Miles Morales crossover. And anytime Bendis is revisiting Jessica Jones, I'm excited. So, very much looking forward to seeing where that goes from here.
Very good. Does that wrap it up for your reading?
That's it.
I have also done a little bit of reading on the side. I am in the midst of working on a little side project here for Place to Be, for a potential column I'm thinking of throwing up, where I recently purchased some #1 issues from Image Comics that have come out the last 7-8 months, from the end of last year to the beginning of this year. And I'm going to go through and give some of them a try and just see how they hook me, see how they attract a new reader like me who's not really, read many Image Comics, in single issue form anyway. And I read the first one of those this week. And I don't want to get too much into it, write about it later at some point, but this was Citizen Jack #1 by Sam Humphries and Tommy Patterson. And it's basically a political satire book. It's about a small town never-do-well who makes a deal with a demon that if he does what the demon tells him to do, that he'll become president of the United States. And it's it's an interesting premise on its face, but unfortunately the issue just didn't have enough going on for it to hook me. Like I got to the end of it, I didn't find the satire as funny as I think it was supposed to be, and I didn't find the character as compelling as he probably should have been. So this one did not really impress me. I wouldn't say it was bad. It just didn't grab me at all. But I'll write about that at a later time. And I have finally finished Volume 1 of the Warren Ellis and Brian Hitch classic series, The Authority. And I'm not going to say any more about it because we will be doing a Long Book Hunters episode on this in the near future. So I'll leave it at that.
All right. And with all that being said, I think we're going to hit you with a break right now. But when we come back, we've got a very special guest. Our very own Dark Passenger, Tim Capel, is here with us once again because, as Greg said earlier, we're taking a look at 2000's X-Men, and there is no individual in all of the Place to Be Nation comics universe that knows the X-Men quite like Tim Capel. So, should be interesting to get his thoughts on this 16-year-old movie at this point.
Oh, absolutely. And until we get to that point, folks, enjoy the following messages. Maybe pause the podcast and go and watch a little bit of that final deletion action. We'll catch you after the break.
Promotional consideration paid for by the following.
What's up, everybody? This is Kevin Kelly. Make sure you check out every episode of The Kevin Kelly Show right here on the Place to Be Nation. PlaceToBeNation.com. The Kevin Kelly Show. Every episode is a winner. At least we hope.
Place to Be Nation's Justin Rosero here. In addition to The Kevin Kelly Show, we have a ton of great podcasts available to you on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and PlaceToBeNation.com. And we now offer them to you on 2 great feeds as well. On the Place to Be podcast feed, you can check out Scott Criscolo and me on the Mothership, the Place to Be podcast, with our famous Vintage Vault pay-per-view reviews. PTBN also covers current day wrestling with clotheslines and headlines, main event, Mission Indie Possible, in our monthly pay-per-view reaction shows with immediate feedback on WWE, NXT, and Ring of Honor Super shows. Relive Wrestling's past with our monthly pay-per-view rewind series led by Ben Morse and the Dangerous Alliance Wrestling podcast as we dive into various subjects in the form of exercises and games. We also have sports covered too with the Sports Lounge, the TJ McClune Show, and NBA Team Podcast. On our brand new PTB Pop podcast feed, we offer great shows such as the Glenn Butler Podcast Hour Spectacular, Rank and File, Lucha Undead, as well as a veritable podcast heaven for comics fans with the Hard-Traveling Fanboys, Sellers Points, Todd Weber's Conversation, and Imaginary Stories. Subscribe to both feeds on iTunes and be sure to rate and leave feedback as well. All of these shows are available on PlayStation.com, where we cover pro wrestling, sports, movies, comics, plus tournaments and more. Be sure to check out on the right-hand side of the site for details on how to support the site when you shop at Amazon and download our free Place to Be Vintage Vault Refresh ebooks. We also want to thank our friends at Bonehead's Wing Bar in West Warwick, Rhode Island, and Fall River, Massachusetts, and Scott Keats' blog of Doom. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr as well. PlaceToBeNation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.
This is Parv, and I'm here to tell you to listen and subscribe to the Pro Wrestling Only Place to Be Nation podcast network. That's the PWO PTBN podcast network, where you'll find a ton of in-depth shows done by hardcore fans. We've got Chris Zellner's 1-2 punch of Exile on Bad Street, and with David Bixenspan, a smash hit Between the Sheets. We've got Wrestling Culture with Dylan Hales and Dave Musgrave, Goodwill Wrestling and the reaction shows with Good Old Will from Texas. We got This Week in Wrestling with my man Pete and Johnny Sorrow, Stephen Graham and Tim Livingston's Pro Wrestling Super Show, Tag Teams Back Again with Kelly and Marty Sleaze, and a ton of other great shows too. And of course there's Titans of Wrestling and Where the Big Boys Play with yours truly and some dude from down south called Chad. PWO PTBN Podcast Network.
Do you know what happens to a toad when it's struck by lightning? The same thing that happens to everything else.
Welcome back, fans. This is Stagger Lee Marshall with the Hard-Traveling Fanboys 1-800-COLLECT report. And I understand that with Nick and I right now on the Weasel sighting report, we have Tim Capel. Tim.
Hello, gentlemen. Oh, I am so pleased to learn that the comics imprint of PlaceToBeNation.com has not been canceled following our collective performances during the 2016 Welpies Award. Well, I suppose this episode hasn't aired yet, so that remains to be seen. But, listeners, if you're hearing this, we didn't get canceled, so go us.
Go us indeed. The only thing that the beginning of this show is missing is a musical interlude after all.
Oh, okay. Well, all right, so does this make me like the Heather Locklear to Greg, your Corey Thorne-Smith, and Nick, your Andrew Shue?
Oh my God, that's such a great comparison.
I am not fluent in the ways of 90s soap opera, so
I'm sorry.
I'm going to conveniently bow out now.
I thought you might not be. That's okay though. I don't want to put myself on high a pedestal though. But I don't want to compare any of us to the greatness that was Grant Show's Jake Hansen. I mean,
Jake.
Oh man,
Jake was the lovable rebel with a heart of gold.
He was, man. You know that dude he just smelled like Jack Daniels and motor oil. Like, you know, when he walked into a room, like panties would just reflexively moisten and fall off. But we can't aspire to that kind of greatness. So,
strangely enough, that's what happens whenever Stephanie Holly and Tim Capel think about Grant Gustin.
Well, that's true as well. I mean, let's face it, the comics contingent of Place to Be Nation does pull the most tail of any of the Place to Be staff members. I mean, that goes without saying. We're comics fans. I mean, come on.
That is correct. Yes, sir.
And I cannot believe I just used the term pulls the most tail, but I guess there's a first time for everything.
Well, and it's all tied together because you see, it may seem that our conversation about Melrose Place was a non sequitur, but if I were casting an X-Men movie in 1990, let's say 5 or 6, I would have cast him, Jake, as Wolverine.
See, I like the cut of your jib. That's exactly where I was going with that.
Absolutely. I mean, and I was telling Nick earlier that at the airport this week, fans have been pulling me aside talking about, have you seen the halfies? I mean,
buzzing about the halfies. Well, after this episode, everybody's going to be buzzing about a movie that came out in 2000. So let's get right to it and talk about Bryan Singer's simply titled film, X-Men.
I was going to say, what are we talking about tonight? X-Men, right?
X-Men, that is correct. And
I think I'm contractually obligated to in my PlayStation contract.
Tim, we only call upon Tim when there's something X-Men related that we need to discuss.
I promise that like less than 5% of this podcast will be Cyclops related. I promise you.
Well, that'll line up nicely with less than 5% of the film, I believe. Is Cyclops.
Yeah, so before we get cracking on the movie, we're going to set the movie up to start playing here in just a second. And what we're going to do is the same way we did with our Batman 89 watching 2 months ago. If you've forgotten, what we do basically is we're all going to put the movie on, and we're not necessarily going to get through the whole thing. We're not necessarily going to give you a play-by-play of every scene or anything. We're just going to start the movie, and we invite you to watch it with us. And it's just going to be used to spark our conversation. If there's any doldrums in the conversation, we might remark on the scene, or we might talk about just memories that are brought back to mind from seeing different things. So with that being said, if everybody on the panel here is ready, what we're going to do is we're going to count you down out there in the audience. And when I've got the Blu-ray in, I think Tim's got the DVD in, Nick's got the DVD in. So when the time comes, we're going to hit the play button, and we invite you to do it with us. So with all that being said and done, let's do it in 3, 2, 1, hit play. And now we go to the black loading screen of my Blu-ray player.
And my 2000 DVD, which is taking a minute to. Okay, now we're in Auschwitz. We're good.
Yep.
Oh, you're in Auschwitz already.
Also, words that have never been spoken. We're in Auschwitz.
Okay,
we're good.
So where is everyone? Because I'm at the 20th Century Fox.
I'm at the FBI piracy warning.
Hang on.
Well, this ought to be interesting.
I'm backing up. All right, we're good.
All right,
now I'm getting 20th Century Fox.
Okay, let's pause for a moment.
Yeah.
And let Greg catch up, because I'm starting with the Patrick Stewart narration now. Greg, have you gotten through 20th Century Fox?
I'm still going through the overly long 20th Century Fox intro here. It's still they still want me to know that it's 20th Century Fox. Mutation is the key.
All right, there we go. We got it. So this Patrick Stewart monologue, have they used this in every X-Men movie?
They have used a Patrick Stewart monologue, I think, in every X-Men movie, at least in the original trilogy. I don't think it was the same, but they had something.
Something akin to this.
Something akin to this. It was a little bit different in X3. I think they actually... You know what? That one they might not have included a monologue for. I don't remember offhand, but I know that there was one recorded because I've heard it. It might have just been like a deleted section.
Right.
Really cool intro sequence here, title sequence.
Yeah, and then you always get the Cerebro, I think, that starts every movie.
This technique was actually kind of copied by Sam Raimi for the Spider-Man title.
For the Spider-Man movies. And I actually love the way they did it in Spider-Man. I can't remember how they did it in X2, but I know for Spider-Man 2 and Spider-Man 3, he used the title sequence that was kind of like this to show you recaps of the previous two movies. So if your memory was a little bit fuzzy, or maybe you hadn't seen 1 or 2 going into 3 or 1 going into 2, you kind of got the story in brief, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Kind of like the Incredible Hulk title sequence did for here's our version of the Hulk, here's how he was created, and you just go from the jump after the title sequence.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of a bold choice starting an X-Men movie at Auschwitz,
I was going to say, it really throws you into the thick of it here. And in a way, I think this was the movie and maybe even Bryan Singer announcing to the world, this is what this is. It's one of those deals that you can almost see as trying to legitimize the source material because, not to get too far ahead of ourselves necessarily, but comic book films did not have the greatest reputation going into the year 2000.
Right, because we were coming off of Batman and Robin.
Yeah.
You had Blade, which had been, pretty well received.
Yeah.
Pretty well received, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, what was the last one that was really, really well received.
Generally,
I think you'd have to go back to Batman '89 probably?
Yeah.
Because even Returns is pretty divisive for a lot of people.
It is, yeah. And Batman Forever was pretty shaky. Like you said, Batman and Robin, which was just 3 years before in 1997, but was so bad and left, well, not, I don't want to say bad, but so not what the world was looking for at the time in a Batman movie that it left such a bad taste in the mouth. And even though it was just 3 years before this, it feels like it's about 10 years ago.
it feels like this is very much, in some ways, a reaction to Batman and Robin.
Yes.
That was the image of the comic book film at that time. And I'm glad you brought that up so early, because this is as good a launching point as anything. One of the main things that I'm interested in that I don't know a lot about, because I speculated throughout my childhood about an X-Men movie. My friends and I did. I mean, this was a pipe dream for us, and I remember as far back as third grade sitting with my friend Bo McKinley, and we were talking about casting, fantasy casting.
Great name.
He does a great name. Fantasy casting X-Men, if they ever did a movie for it. But what was, do you know, Tim, what was the background of an X-Men movie? How far back were they talking about making an X-Men movie? And
my gosh.
What was the process to get into this?
Yeah, so the X-Men has a long, tangled history and kind of development hell in Hollywood. Very, very, to keep this pretty concise, because this probably be a podcast onto itself. Interest in X-Men as a film property dates back to 1984 by my reckoning. At the time, Orion had the film rights. So you remember Orion Pictures from the 80s.
Oh, of course.
Some of our favorite 80s blockbusters. I think they did RoboCop, did they not?
Yeah, exactly.
So, okay, that already brings a question to my mind. Like, my understanding of it was that X-Men was one of the group of properties that was sold off in the 90s to keep Marvel afloat. So you're saying this was optioned well before that little mini crisis they had.
Well before that. I don't know if this was like a Jim Shooter deal or a just Stan Lee shopping Marvel properties around Hollywood deal. I'm inclined to think the latter, because Stan Lee definitely wanted to make his mark in Hollywood at the time, and this really lines up with that. So he was out of kind of the day-to-day operations of Marvel by this point for sure, living out in L.A., trying to sell...
Enjoying the life of a true believer.
Absolutely. So I feel like this was a Stan Lee where he maybe finagled something. Orion had the rights. But there was a screenplay that was actually written by Jerry Conway and Roy Thomas.
Really?
Again, yeah, we're talking 1984. And to give you just, I've never read this script or this treatment. I don't know if it can truly be called a screenplay, but from the brief synopsis that I gather from Back Issue Magazine, it's pretty much a gathering of the team type of story with characters from the second generation of X-Men. So you've got your Cyclops, your Wolverine, Nightcrawler, Colossus, Storm, Kitty Pryde, that gang, and it's Professor X getting the team together. So this incarnation is comprising the original X-Men in this script, and they are combating a evil organization called Proteus. Proteus.
Ooh.
And a mutant island, you might call it a giant-sized mutant island that wants to become a new continent.
The Genosha, I'm assuming?
Well, I don't think Genosha had actually been developed by 1984. So this was more Krakoa from Giant Size X-Men 1, the mutant island that walks like a man. I don't know that they were going to call it that in script, but so this is a sentient island, I guess, that's a mutant. So I'm kind of envisioning, like, is this giant-sized mutant petitioning the United Nations for statehood? Like, is that what the plot of this film is pivoting? I don't know. It sounds
This would
bizarre.
have been a disaster if that movie was made in the 80s.
I was gonna say,
especially with the
Can you
special effects that would
imagine
have been
them
available
trying
to
to
him.
make a giant talking mutant island?
I know. So, of all the various X-Men scripts that have been floated over the years, like, this is the one I think I kind of most want to see because it sounds the most bug fucking insane. So that was 1984. After that, Orion passed due to some financial problems they were having, and I think the rights reverted back to Marvel. By 1989, Stan Lee and Chris Claremont were actually in talks with Carolco Pictures, and James Cameron was attached as producer of this prospective X-Men movie with...
I knew James Cameron was involved somehow. I couldn't remember if he was involved with X-Men or Spider-Man, though. Like,
well, both, actually. It was
it
was X-Men first, and Catherine Bigelow was capped to direct at the time. I don't know if they were not at the time, but in any event, she was involved as well. This could have been interesting. I believe that produced a script called Wolverine in the X-Men, which was put together by Gary Goldman. It's pretty pedestrian from what I can remember of it. That's basically, oh gosh, I'm trying to remember that one versus some of the later scripts that came together, but it is exactly what it says in the title. It's a Wolverine movie, but with the X-Men attached as kind of ancillary characters.
Which I know is your favorite approach to the
Yes, no doubt. So it's Wolverine with like Cyclops, Jean Grey. I'm looking at a synopsis now. Nightcrawler, Kitty Pryde, and Magneto, who inexplicably is named Thomas Prince in this movie.
What?
You got me. So it says...
I bet they gave him I bet they gave Magneto his terrible 80s costume, too.
Not to interrupt your retelling of history here, but I can't help but see on screen right now, and I want to talk about a little bit things that Singer has revisited throughout the franchise, because we saw Auschwitz earlier, and how many scenes have we had set in Auschwitz over the course of the franchise, and also this cage fight that he seems to come back to, because he just did one in X-Men Apocalypse
with Angel, yeah.
Yeah, no doubt. So in this Wolverine and the X-Men, it says, in the days before the world knows that mutants exist, Wolverine and Professor Xavier recruit Kitty Pryde and learn of a man named Thomas Prince. Prince is an industrialist with political ambitions who is effectively stirring up anti-mutant hysteria, which he whips into a frenzy when he recruits Jason Wingard, Mastermind, from the X-Men's roster to help use his mental powers to frame them. The frame-up is so successful that almost immediately the mutant witch hunt begins, and Prince, along with his superhumanly strong associate Atalanta, hit the presidential campaign trail while the X-Men face the death penalty for murder. Okay. Prince turns out to be a, quote, master of magnetism, and his plan is to incite a race war that, naturally, mutants will win. He does not succeed. So
that's key, by the way. That's key for the franchise.
I think so. So picture some of those early Marvel films from the early 90s, like those direct-to-video things, your Captain America, your Punisher. I think there was even a Spider-Man deal, some of those made-for-TV Hulk movies. This would have been like a team movie in that same vein, I believe.
I wonder how it would have compared to Generation X. Legendary Generation X.
Maybe even less favorably, if you could believe it or not. So, again, not to get too long-winded here, that doesn't happen because Olco folds, that company goes away. Cameron's interest wanes because Stan Lee has now sold him on Spider-Man. So James Cameron goes on to not make Spider-Man. That's a completely different story. But that's the end of anything happening with X-Men for a while. Marvel still tries to shop the property around. Columbia Pictures declines on it. This is, again, all still happening in the early 90s. The first real trend when it came to producing this particular film that we ultimately got in 2000 was in 1994. That's when Lauren Shula Donner, on behalf of 20th Century Fox, actually purchased the rights to X-Men largely on the back of the success of the animated series. Now, what's interesting about this is that Andrew Kevin Walker was initially tapped to write the screenplay. If you're not familiar with his work, he did Seven. That was his big kind of breakthrough hit. Yeah, in 1995. And another connection here, not that he had anything to do with the movie, but Seven was very influential on Captain America's Civil War, if you can believe it or not. The Russo brothers have gone on record as stating that kind of that big final twist in Seven, the what's in the box, open the box, was built into and sort of paid homage to in Civil War with Tony's wanting to see what was on the video at the climax of that movie. That's not just fan theory. That's something that the Russo brothers have gone on record as stating, influenced by Seven. So in a roundabout way, Andrew Kevin Walker got his footprint on the Marvel Cinematic Universe after all. His particular script was extremely ambitious, pretty much involved just the original X-Men plus Wolverine battling Magneto and the Brotherhood of Mutants. So it was like Magneto and the heavy hitters, Sabretooth, Juggernaut, Blob, Toad, kind of the guys that eventually made it into this movie that we're watching now. But at the same time, you've got Henry Gyrick and Senator Kelly, Bolivar Trask launching the Sentinel program. I think, and this script is available online if you want to actually look it up. And if you remind me, I'll post a link to it, maybe in our Facebook group or something.
Yeah,
it's from 1994. It involves Magneto trying to make a mutant haven out of the island of Manhattan. So the X-Men oppose him. The world is kind of already steeped in anti-mutant hysteria, so it's kind of got this nihilistic bent to it. That seems pretty typical of Andrew Kevin Walker's outlook on the world, or at least at the time, especially going into a movie like Seven. So we're already hinting at the dystopia that we would eventually see in something like Days of Future Past. So it's the X-Men versus the Brotherhood with the Sentinels kind of in the middle of this thing. So it was an extremely ambitious script. Would have been way, way, way more than 20th Century Fox would have been willing to commit and budget for. But it's pretty interesting and pretty well written. Worth checking out. Again, I'll post a link to that script if I can find it. It shouldn't be too hard to track down. That didn't go anywhere, obviously, for budgetary reasons. You got some rewrites throughout the mid-'90s from Joss Whedon, Michael Chabon.
Who they infamously only kept one line of his dialogue.
Yeah, yep. So 2 lines from what Joss Whedon contributed actually made it into the movie. The first was the extremely good line from Wolverine directed to Cyclops, "You're a dick," which was a good laugh line in the theater, and I appreciate it as well. The second was, take a gander.
It was the infamous, what happens to a toad when it gets struck by lightning?
What happens to a toad when it gets struck by lightning, yeah. So maybe I think I'll have some more words on that if we should get to that point in the movie. Whedon tries to defend it, but I kind of call bullshit on his defense of that terrible line.
Yeah,
I don't know. I think I kind of buy his defense of it because I like watching Buffy with my wife, which I've never been a huge Buffy fan. It seems like there are a lot of things like that are kind of just cheap, but it's dependent entirely upon the delivery and the direction, you know. And I feel like for whatever reason, the choice was made to deliver that line in a very sincere, straightforward manner, which was not probably Whedon's intention when he wrote it.
I can see
or at least
that.
I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, I can see that. However, I've run it through in my head many times, and I can't I don't think Norm Macdonald could make me laugh with that line.
I was going to say I'm somewhere in the middle where he had written that line for Buffy, and that's, you know, within that show where there are a lot of things that are very tongue-in-cheek and, like you said, that are played straight but played for laughs at the same time. Sarah Michelle Gellar delivering that line might have worked, but Halle Berry, and honestly, I think anyone playing Storm as the character should be played, it wouldn't make sense coming out of her mouth. Like, and that's always been Whedon's big defense was, oh, well, Halle Berry just didn't deliver it properly. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but Storm shouldn't say one-liners like that. Like, that just sounds stupid coming from Storm. Even if it, no matter how, like you said, no matter how it was delivered, I just don't see how that would work. So,
speaking of odd choices, on screen right now, we're getting our first introduction to Tyler Mane Sabretooth.
Oh, boy. Yeah, we can get into that. He was an odd choice, was he not?
Yeah, extremely. One of the few things that X-Men Origins Wolverine got right was recasting that role within a guy who can imagine that, actually act.
And actually has dialogue and a character. Like, this is unlike any version of Sabretooth I was familiar with. Now, granted, I'm not nearly as steeped in the lore of the comics as you guys were, but like
I was
knowing him from the show and a few books, I just did not understand what this Sabretooth was supposed to be or what the point was.
I agree, but I was just thinking a minute ago, I was remembering memories of sitting in the theater and watching this first time. You know, I was 16 in 2000. And I got this whole scene, like the introduction of Wolverine and all that was great. And I remember the feeling in the theater. I was like, I turned to my friend. I'm sorry, it wasn't my friend. It was my dad. I was with my parents at that time. I turned to my dad and I said, I can't believe this is actually happening. Like the whole fight scene with the club, and the moment when you see Wolverine's face heal from the wound, you know.
Yeah.
And I was like, I can't believe that I'm actually seeing this. And so all the things that like later on I would nitpick, like Sabretooth and some of the weird characterizations or the use of Rogue as kind of the Kitty Pryde point of view character and everything, all of that stuff didn't matter to me because it was the freaking X-Men on the big screen, which I never ever imagined I would see. I mean, I imagined it, but never thought it would actually happen.
It's funny you should mention that because when this movie came out, you know, it was in the summer of 2000, so around the same time of year. It's about the 16th anniversary of this movie, so a nice round number we're coming up on to be commemorating this film. So well timed on your part. But I remember being on vacation with my family and seeing previews for the movie, and my mom, of all people, was like, "Hey, do you want to see this X-Men movie when it comes out?" And I'm like, of course I'm going to see X-Men when it comes out. I'm like, why are you asking me about this? And she's like, well, I want to see it too. And I'm thinking, you want to see X-Men? She goes, yeah, isn't that based on, you know, that cartoon you used to watch that even though it was called X-Men, it was mostly women and they would beat the shit out of all the guys and it was like really cool and really violent. It's like, yeah, that's the same X-Men. She's like, all right, well, the movie looks really good. I want to see it. I'm like, all right, well, let's see it when it comes out. And so sure enough, we see it like opening weekend. And for my part, I'm watching this like with my hands in front of my face, the whole movie kind of peeking between my fingers, hoping and praying, just don't fuck this up. Don't fuck this up, because you'd heard all the press and the publicity going into it, and I followed the production process pretty closely, and it sounded like they were going to pull it off, right? I had some confidence, but in the back of my mind, because there were so many shitty superhero and comic book movies in recent memories, I'm like, they're going to do something like it's going to start out good, and then they're going to totally just screw the pooch on this. They're going to fuck this up, and I'm going to be like, oh, God, I'm so embarrassed to be in the theater right now. So I'm like so nervous and on edge for the entire movie. And, you know, aside from that terrible storm line, they basically pulled it off. And I was like, wow, they really pulled it off.
And especially relative to expectations, because that's the hard thing about this movie is if you go back in time and you watch it and you compare it to a world where we've got the Avengers and we've got the Dark Knight and we've got Captain America Civil War, you know, it's a different era that we're living in. But you have to contextualize this movie, because at that time, I remember that what you're talking about, because my friends and I, who were X-Men fans, we were hoping, and we were more excited than anything. We were so pumped for this movie, but there was that lingering doubt and that thought of, if they screw this up, we're never going to hear the end of it. We will never hear the end of it from people. And so at that time, a lot of the stuff that gets nitpicked today, like it's easy to go back and nitpick the costumes and, you know, say, why didn't they just embrace their comic book roots? If they had tried to do in 2000 what the MCU was doing with using very comic book accurate costumes, I don't think it would have gone over well at all. In that
absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. In some ways, it does seem a little bit defensive of its source material, going back to, you know, starting out with seeing young Eric Lyncher at Auschwitz, and it's like, wow, this is kind of intense for a comic book movie, but it's trying to sell people on the idea that comics can be serious, almost high art at times. Like, this is why this has been such an enduring and a popular and a resonant franchise for so many years. This is not just, you know, bullshit pulp that's been churned out and consumed by the masses. Like, there's an actual heart and a real soul to this, and we're going to put that on the screen and illustrate that. And I think for a lot of people seeing that, they're like, oh, this is a comic book movie? And the rest of us are going, yes, this is why we like the comics, because
this is what we've been telling you since we were 5 years old.
Yes, it's not bullshit. So it is.
And you guys mentioned, like, following the development of this, and so we talked about Tyler Mane just a minute ago. What was it like when casting news started to break? Because this was before my era of intensely following these projects. I kind of just experienced it in a vacuum almost. I wasn't following it passionately.
It's amazing that you said that, Nick, because we're almost on the same wavelength. I was just about to talk with Tim about one of the things that I'm noticing here is pretty much, and this is kind of a staple and a criticism of the series, is that they handle the Wolverines so well, even when they don't handle the other characters very well. But this whole like intro of Jackman playing Wolverine as he's just kind of, would you say overwhelmed would be a good word, I guess, by Xavier and all these people. This is great stuff. But the reason I even brought it up is I remember, I don't know if it was like this for you and your circle of X-Men friends or whatever, but with me and my friends, there was extreme trepidation about the casting of Wolverine more than any other.
Now we're seeing excited. Rogue sitting next to Jubilee and Kitty Pryde in the classroom here. Just to interrupt slightly, so we got a couple of little cameos here, but
Which is another interesting question to ask, which is why they opted to go with Rogue in the traditional Jubilee Kitty Pryde role. But we'll get to that in a second.
Yeah.
But
go ahead.
What was it like for you from the Wolverine standpoint in particular? In my group, we were excited about Halle Berry playing Storm because she was a big name actress, and we're like, oh, she brings credibility to it. And we were excited about, Famke Janssen as Jean Grey, and of course, Patrick Stewart as Xavier was one of those fantasy castings that we did in, 5th grade. But like Wolverine was the one that everybody was not sold on at the time in our group, but it ended up being the one that was probably the best.
Well, let's talk a second about the casting here. There were actually some very significant casting changes very late into the production process on this movie. They had cast Wolverine not as Hugh Jackman, but Bryan Singer's first choice was Russell Crowe, believe it or not. Russell Crowe turned it down, recommended Hugh Jackman. Singer, his response was more or less, who the fuck is Hugh Jackman? And they pursued other options. They settled on, of all people, Douglas Scott.
Yeah, that's right.
You remember that?
Yeah.
Of Ever After fame, I believe. Boy, what a different career he would have had, it seems like, if he had made it into this movie.
Yeah, I'm looking at his Wikipedia page right now, and he was in Deep Impact, had a role in Mission Impossible 2 before this, but other than that, nothing else, Ever After, like you mentioned, but not really a whole lot else that people would have known him from.
I know. He actually had to pull out of this movie because of Mission Impossible 2, I think, running over schedule.
Oh, my God. Talk about
There was
that.
also something about he had an injury. I don't know if that really contributed to him having to leave the project or not, but I think mainly it was conflicts with Mission Impossible 2. So he was out as Wolverine. So they basically did not have a protagonist on the day of shooting. Hugh Jackman was not cast until 3 weeks and they had started shooting. So I'm guessing 20th Century Fox was shitting their pants at the time here.
Jackman, his only big movie to that point had been Swordfish, I believe, which I think
he hadn't even done that yet. This was his first major North American film appearance. He was a complete he'd been in, I think, some foreign. He was a international star for, I think, some Australian production companies. And I probably sound like a complete jackass saying that, but honestly, he had done nothing that anyone in the United States had seen prior to this movie.
Yeah, the only thing he had really done, according to his Wikipedia page, is he had done some Australian theater, like on stage work, and then done a couple of films. One called Erskineville Kings and the other called Paperback Hero. This was only his third film in his career.
How did we not remember that? I mean, gosh. So we're talking like Sydney Opera House, basically, which was cool in a way because you sort of wanted an X-Men movie to make an actor in the same way that Star Wars kind of made the career of Harrison Ford. And that's exactly what it did for Hugh Jackman. So
and it also tied him nicely to the Edison family because working in Australian theater would tie him into the Pride of the X-Men version of Wolverine.
and your very significant Australian listenership that
yes, we're big with the Aussies and the Kiwis.
Right.
Speaking of, I mentioned those two films just done. I kind of want to see one of them now. This film, Paperback Hero. Here's the plot of this.
Yeah.
It's about an Australian truck driver who writes a best-selling romance novel, but is embarrassed about writing a romance novel because he's a man, and he decides to use the name of his female friend instead as a pen name, and so he's known as Ruby Vale. And it's just a comedy about all the misadventures he gets into as an Australian truck driver who writes romance novels.
Oh fuck! I kind of want to see that now.
So this was a star-making vehicle for Hugh Jackman.
Yes. Also notable, it's worth mentioning as well that Cyclops was originally cast as by Nick Caviezel, or what's his name? James Caviezel.
Jim Caviezel, yeah.
Oh,
Jim
Jesus.
Caviezel, Jesus. Excuse me. So that could have gone very, very differently too. He had to pull out due to commitments to the movie
Frequency. Yeah.
That was kind of a cool movie.
Yeah.
They're doing a TV show.
Yeah. I did hear that, right? They're developing that for TV now.
I think CW's doing it, if I'm not mistaken.
I think that's
Maybe
correct.
it's a different network.
Because they showed like 1 billion advertisements for it during Arrow and Flash this year.
Yeah, they've already ordered it to a series.
Which I liked the movie a lot. I thought it was solid.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So Nick Caviezel, Jim Caviezel, that would have brought something, I think, very different to the role of Cyclops in this movie. I don't have much against James Marsden's performance, but you can kind of see how, because of these casting changes, the pieces don't quite fit together in the way that maybe they should. And I say that because Hugh Jackman and Famke Janssen have great chemistry, like from the jump. Even though Jackman hadn't really done anything stateside, like he is just a pro. And it's like he had arrived, from the minute he appears on screen, you're like, holy shit, this is Wolverine. I can't believe I would even consider anyone else.
Hold on, let me ask a question. I just noticed this on the screen. Magneto just referred to this assistant that Mystique was posing as Mr. Gyrich. So
yes,
was that to be Henry Gyrich that was dead off screen before we ever started the movie?
It was, yes. I believe that the intention was that Henry Gyrich was like a congressional aide to Senator Kelly.
Right, yes.
And we never saw him other than through this impersonation by Mystique. So that was just sort of an Easter egg thrown in. I don't think in any earlier iteration of this script he had a larger role. I do know that, after like we were talking about, the Kevin Andrew Walker treatment, there were several others. And eventually what would become this movie was scripted by, largely Ed Solomon, and then there were, revisions done by Bryan Singer and producer Tom DeSanto. They got Christopher McQuarrie, who had done The Usual Suspects with Bryan Singer. Mm-hmm. As late as February of 1999, the script still included Beast as a character.
Oh, wow.
It still included Pyro as well as a member of the Brotherhood.
Probably good that they left Pyro out, because it could have led to another unfortunate situation where Hugh Jackman might have read the script in which Wolverine would have called Pyro a dingo, and then we could have...
Yes. Another unfortunate callback, no doubt. So that basically became the shooting script, except for Fox saying, this is going to be too expensive, you have to trim some fat here. So they took out Beast, they took out Pyro. But honestly, reading those scripts, which you can also find online, I will try to post links to them as well. Beast was kind of earmarked for deletion anyway, because he did not participate in the final battle in this movie. He had what seemed to be a misunderstanding type fight with Wolverine in the middle section of the film. Pyro didn't do much of anything, so it was like you could take them out and not lose anything from what ultimately became this movie.
Right.
Other than that,
you mentioned that Beast was marked for deletion. Do you think that perhaps he was marked for final deletion?
Final Deletion.
Here we go again. Anyway,
only Brother Nero can say for sure.
We mentioned, Gyrick kind of been, that's an Easter egg for the fans, and the implication is that off-screen he's been killed. Mm-hmm. That's another interesting thing about this movie is it doesn't really do what you would expect in that it picks up with the X-Men kind of already formed, and there's the implicant of a larger history here rather than going, at it from the perspective of getting the team together origin type of story. Was that surprising to anyone? Because I remember watching the movie when I was 12. I would have been 12, about to turn 13, and I enjoyed the movie, but I was kind of surprised they didn't do a here's how we find each character kind of thing.
It wasn't surprising to me, and here's why: because of the cartoon. If you remember when the cartoon started, the cartoon never, ever, ever, to my knowledge, did a forming of the X-Men show. It started out, and the team had already been in operation for some amount of time, and there were things that had happened in their past that were referenced, but they just kind of threw you in there, almost as if you were picking up one of the issues of the comic. I feel like that was almost intentional. I know for me it worked, because I was like, okay, well, I can pick up an issue of, I was reading, I think, the main X-Men title. I was like, well, I can pick up Uncanny, and even though I haven't read every issue of Uncanny, I can pick it up and figure out what's going on. And I think that's kind of the route they went with this in, a different era of movies, an era in which Batman 89, he was already Batman. And I feel like only in the modern era has there kind of been this obsession with telling every detail of everybody's story at the right from Jump Street, pretty much. But would you agree, Tim?
I would say pretty much the exact same thing. There are movies like that we see today, like the Avengers and Justice League, that are made up of these really big, heavy hitter type characters that have these long storied histories in their own right, that you can't just do an Avengers movie without already introducing like Captain America and Thor, arguably Iron Man. You certainly can't do a Justice League movie without people being introduced to Superman and Batman in some form or fashion already. With X-Men, I mean, honestly, year 2000, nobody knew who the X-Men were. Maybe they'd heard of it as a concept, but if you ask the average layperson on the street, hey, name one of the X-Men, they'd go, and maybe come up with Wolverine, maybe not. But this was not a well-known property. And I think just for the sake of, economy and with the limited budget that they had, they couldn't really spare the expense of going through this big, long origin story of gathering the team and delivering the big action set pieces that it really needed to in order to sell the audience on this as a thing that they would be interested in and be entertained by. So you kind of couldn't waste the time on an origin story, especially on one that frankly isn't that interesting as compared to most. I kind of think that's the problem that Fox has run into with the Fantastic Four property, is this obsession with doing the origin story. Like the Fantastic Four do not have an entertaining and interesting origin in their own right. And, their arch enemy, Dr. Doom, who they want to put in every movie at the same time, is totally divorced from their origin. So they come up with these movies where they have to do an origin for the team and an origin for, their antagonist at the same time, and it just never really comes together and it never works. And I think the problem with that is again, this obsession on we have to do the origin, when honestly, no, you don't. If it's not that good in its own right, don't bother. Maybe just do a flashback or just have an implied history there. Hit the ground running. And that's what this movie did. And I think it made the right call in that respect.
At least on my end, I'm seeing some vintage poor 2000 era CGI or Robert Kelly's slide through the fence. But
yes, just witnessed that as well. There is some dodgy CGI in this for certain.
Well, I mean, every film of the era kind of had, its ups and downs with the CGI. And that Robert Kelly character was one I was always kind of surprised we never revisited in the franchise. I always got the implication that was a true comic book move in setting this guy to come back in a big way down the road.
As we 90s soap opera fans know, if they don't find the body, they're not dead.
No.
Absolutely.
No.
We've touched on it a little bit before. You guys mentioned, using Rogue kind of as the Kitty Pryde of this movie. I know for me, when the first time I saw it, the only version of Rogue I really was familiar with was the one from the show, from the animated series. And so seeing this version of Rogue that was not a Southern caricature was a wild departure.
Mm-hmm.
And looking back on it now, especially, having the knowledge that I do or have gained in the last, 15, 16 years, it kind of makes me wonder why they didn't just use Kitty Pryde from the jump.
Yeah, do you have any insight on that, Tim? Because I know that I was familiar with I was used to seeing the Rogue in the cartoon and in the comics at that time, who had already absorbed Miss Marvel's powers, and thus was presented as, arguably the most powerful member of the team. I mean, she was on the cartoon. Rogue kicked more butt than anybody, pretty much.
Oh, yeah.
So what was the thought process? And there's Stan Lee. Where was the thought process?
As a hot dog vendor on the beach, yeah.
What was the thought process on going with Rogue instead of Kitty Pryde or even Jubilee?
I think that was just a byproduct of this film being an outgrowth of the 90s X-Men as a property, as a franchise, as kind of perceived by the general public to the extent that it was. When you think about the X-Men in the 90s, Kitty Pryde was kind of a non-entity, in all honesty. Yes, she was regularly appearing in the comics, but the comic she was appearing in was Excalibur, which was
the British X-Men.
Yeah, the British X-Men book, and was not exactly setting sales charts on fire. Rogue was hot and heavy in 90s X-Men. So if you were going to do a point of view character, your choices are limited to Kitty Pryde, who's pretty much out for reasons we've described, Jubilee, who would have made sense, but in the grand scheme of things is not that, let's face it, important of a character, especially to hang a major, film debut on. So if you take Rogue, it's like, well, when you get right down to it, she is the mutant who most embodies the idea of the outsider, who is the most alienated, who it sucks the most to be a mutant, right?
Right. That's one thing her character's always had, is that underlying tragedy element, that she can't have human contact at all.
Yeah, because certain characters like Storm, you can control the fucking weather. That's great. I would love to be a mutant if I was going to be Storm,
Mm-hmm.
But if I had to be Cyclops, that would kind of suck. If I had to be Rogue, that would really suck. I mean, that's pretty much the worst hand you could draw.
Well, really, all she would need to do was get in touch with Chris O'Donnell and get some of those rubber lips he used in Batman and Robin, and that really solves all the issues, I think. Rubber lips.
Keep in mind, we're trying to distance ourselves from that.
He had to become immune to everything he saw and
everything
he don't.
To everything you see and everything you are.
We're gonna have to do that one.
Oh my God! Yeah, absolutely.
But
at least I can have fun with that one. If we watch Batman Forever, I'll just be pissed off the entire time.
Yeah.
Come on! You don't want Two-Face just continuing to flip the coin until he gets his...
Just flip the coin until he gets
the result
outcome
that he wants.
Which defeats the entire fucking point of the character. Yeah. But we digress.
So I think basically what it comes down to is Rogue was going to be in this movie no matter what, because Rogue was synonymous with X-Men of the 90s. You also had to have your point of view character, so they just kind of merged those two needs together. And certainly this was not an origin story for the team, but as an introduction to the team for Wolverine and Rogue, I think that was the right, track to take.
Mm-hmm. It works
because they are your point of view. Rogue is ultimately your point of view character, but Wolverine is like the cool guy who isn't supposed to be there but's hanging out and ultimately he's the outsider who becomes the insider kind of thing. So
you might say, to tie it back, that he's the fun-loving rebel with heart of gold.
You might say that. Exactly. He's the Jake Hansen, the Daryl Dixon of the series.
Exactly. So. I love the fact that we mentioned Jake Hansen before Daryl Dixon.
Oh my God, we've got to do. We've got to do not only a Beverly Hills 90210 podcast, but a Melrose Place podcast. The only problem with the 90210 podcast is I think too many people would want to be on it. Melrose Place, though, I think we could make happen because I feel like there aren't as many people who are interested in that.
I feel like we might be the only ones, in fact.
We might be. And Justin, too. Justin definitely was into Melrose Place. So,
and besides, that's never stopped us before. So why should it stop now? I mean, we just did a half-year awards podcast in comics, for God's sake.
That's true. We could make it happen. But anyway, getting back to the subject at hand, it just, it made sense for Rogue and Wolverine to be your point of view characters. This is the origin for them with respect to how they came into the X-Men, but not an origin of the team as a whole, which, I mean, this is a small team. All we've really got is Professor X, Cyclops, Storm, and Jean, and that's all you need. A lot of the elements that were included in earlier drafts of Beast as the scientist, as the doctor, they transferred over to Jean, so that's why she's Dr. Jean Grey, which is a little bit odd.
Yeah, it was. I was going to comment on that earlier.
She turned Cerebro's fluid.
I was going to say, Mystique just put the diarrhea into Cerebro, so...
She put the Dark Passenger.
She loaded it up with the Dark Passenger. That's where we're at this point in the movie. Yep.
We got to get back to Tyler Mane because he doesn't have a lot of lines. What in the world? Like, I mean, I know Sabretooth's a big dude. He's supposed to be big and scary and all that, but what made them decide to not give Sabretooth any lines in the script? And
they didn't give any of the brothers any lines other than Magneto. Like Mystique has a few lines. Toad has 2 or 3 lines, and Mystique probably has 6 or 7 lines. And other than that, Magneto is he is the Paul Heyman of the team, doing all the talking. As the mute Brotherhood stands behind him.
My client, Mortimer Toynbee.
I had forgotten that was his name.
I think that's one of those things when Cyclops and Storm draw as short shrift as they do in this movie, you're not going to get a lot from Sabretooth and Toad. Sabretooth is pretty much here for visual presence only, and on that count, he excels. I mean, he's great as just that imposing figure. We're at the train station scene now, which here we go. He's about to fuck shit up big time with Storm. And he doesn't really need a lot of line. He doesn't need to be a master thespian either to pull it off. You just put a couple of words in his mouth, accentuate the positives, and
like Paul Heyman might do.
And conceal the weaknesses. And Cyclops just blew the roof off the train station thanks to Toad. And Storm now is taking advantage of that, which I thought this was a really good scene for her, where she's not as helpless as she seems here. Say what you will of Halle Berry's performance, but you do see her get to kick some ass when called upon in this movie. She just, knocked the shit out of Sabretooth here. And I do want to say that I'm watching this on DVD right now, and I swear they clean these effects up a little bit on the Blu-ray, because a lot of this stuff is coming off a lot flatter than I remember it being. I don't know if that's just the passage of time, but like I said, I watched this movie just a couple of years ago on Blu-ray, and I don't remember it looking this wonky in the effect department.
I was about to comment that to me the lightning effect looked really good but I'm watching it on Blu-ray. This is the first time. This is so interesting because you mentioned this is your first time watching the DVD in a while. This is my first time ever watching the Blu-ray. So I think for years I viewed it as kind of like the effects were flat, and now seeing it on this Blu-ray, I agree. It does look like they cleaned up the effects a little bit because.
All right, so I'm not crazy.
I'm watching the X-Men 1.5 DVD, and I think they hold up fairly well. I mean, it's as good as you can, I think, reasonably expect from 2000.
Particularly, their budget was not what you would expect.
Yeah. Oh my God, their budget!
I thought the shot they just got where Cyclops, Vision kind of tore through the roof of the train station. I actually thought that was a pretty well done.
Yeah, that still looked pretty good. But I thought the storm lightning effect was kind of, But like I said, I remember watching it on Blu-ray, which, is your experience right now, Greg, and thinking that looked pretty good. And I'm like, underwhelmed this time around. Which, I think Nick and I are having a different experience than you are. But that's interesting to me. I will say that. You should mention the budget, which, God, it's hard to believe. On this film in 2000 was budgeted at $75 million, which,
wow,
adjusted for like $2016, we're getting very between the sheets on this podcast right now, but but if you want to adjust that for inflation, that's only a little bit over $100 million today.
Which is crazy.
Which one of these films would never be made for that?
No, it is. I mean, talk about lean. It's very clear that Fox had kind of low expectations for this movie, and yet it made back its budget about 4 times over. So,
right.
To say that this was a success it was a resounding success.
This whole
a lot of credit is given to Blade for kind of spearheading that, the modern wave of superhero films that we live in today. But I think Blade both gets more credit than it deserves and less credit than it deserves, in that, yes, it was a very successful comic book movie, but going into it, nobody knew that was a comic book movie.
It's true. Blade is much more of a genre film. Genre. Than it is a superhero film, in my opinion, because it plays more like,
especially the first one.
It plays more like an action horror type movie than you would expect from a comic movie. And from what I understand, it also was drastically different from the comic book version of Blade.
Yeah, and it was like a kick-ass Wesley Snipes action movie that had vampires in it, which
it was a Snipes vehicle.
That wasn't unheard of at the time. Look at John Carpenter's Vampires from 1998. That was, it could have been almost the same thing. So for people to hear after the fact, oh, that was based on a comic book, okay, I can see that. But it's not like these production companies looked at the success of that movie and said, oh, shit, we have to make comic book movies now.
Speaking of diarrhea, the cop who had the bullet being shoved into his brain looked like he was taking a dump just now. But
this is a great sequence.
Oh, yeah. This is
the last 5 minutes in general, starting in the train, have been awesome. The whole scene, the first time, I'll never forget this, the first time watching this movie, when Magneto went on the train and used his powers to pick Wolverine up and start separating his claws, I thought they were going to do it. I turned to my mom and I pointed at the screen, and I was just like, they're gonna. I thought they were going to pull his adamantium out,
right?
And, which would have been crazy to do in the first movie. But I was like,
especially the first half of the first
exactly.
movie.
I was like, my God, they're going to do it. And then you go right into this scene with Magneto basically displaying the full strength of his powers, and Xavier displaying the full strength of his powers, which was really cool.
And we have to talk about Ian McKellen's performance a little bit here. Who, I could watch him recite the phone book pretty much and be mesmerized, but his Magneto is just fucking off the chain, and which is a very 2000 term, and I think is appropriate.
Yeah, I like it.
No, it's like we say so many times about Batman the Animated Series, because that show had so many great portrayals of certain characters, that so much so that when you read the books, you now read it in the voice of that character. And now anytime I read Magneto, I always hear Ian McKellen in my head. That's always been that way since
especially his condescending utterance of, Charles, I don't think I can stop them all, Charles. Why don't you just kill me now, Charles? He's
and I know this is a
with
different
condescension.
Yes, a different movie entirely that we're not talking about on this one. But he also had one of my favorite lines from X2 when they're sitting on the plane and I know
where you're going with
this. The one where what are you going to do? Scratch it with your claws. And then the other one, which I always recite to this day, which is, I can't remember the line that sets it up, but Rogue says something to him, and she's like, so you're a terrorist? And he goes, is that what they say? And then he's like, Mystique and I love what you've done with your hair.
He and Mystique just being incredibly bitchy in the backseat. They're just chuckling to themselves. We love what you've done with your hair.
But yeah, I love it because he brings it in this movie with such that arrogant side of Magneto, and he even on occasion, if you listen on occasion when he says Charles, it kind of sounds a little bit like the guy that did the voice in the cartoon.
It does.
Charles.
So yeah, and the thing is, he's not really that that Claremontian noble Magneto who. I mean, yes, there is a certain sympathetic read on Magneto in this movie and in all the movies, but you also have that Silver Age bad guy element to him, where like he's using Rogue to power the machine, and toward the end of this movie, Wolverine's going to call him on his bullshit. He's like, if you were so righteous, it would be you up there, not killing a teenager in furtherance of your cause, and he just kind of shrugs it off. And in a lot of ways, you can look at that as being a very out of character or inconsistent take on Magneto, but boy, have there been a lot of conflicting depictions of that character over the years.
Continuing.
So, I mean, for this film to go in any one direction or the other is honestly fair game, and it's down to the performance. And on that point, I mean, McKellen just knocks it out of the park. I cannot. You talk about dream casting. For the longest time, as like a dumb kid, I saw, of all people, Malcolm McDowell as kind of.
Oh my God!
No, that's not that bad.
Freaking kidding me, dude! That is incredible because I found recently. I went through my storage shed back home, which some of the pictures I posted on the Facebook group. But I found a bunch of old stuff from my childhood. One of which was a sheet of paper that had X-Men casting from I would have been probably 5th, 6th grade from me and my friend Bo, and we had Malcolm McDowell as Magneto at that time.
No way, dude.
Yes,
you're the only other person I've heard of who wanted him as Magneto.
Absolutely.
Only other person. Not even Wizard Magazine put him as Magneto.
And I remember, because we would get those wizards that would fantasy cast, and we would always pick them apart and be like, oh, no, never. Here's who we
Never.
want.
Yeah.
Patrick Stewart, that worked. And,
always, yeah.
And we also had Kelsey Grammer as Beast that didn't happen until the unfortunate X3.
Sure, yeah. Oh man, that warms my heart so much to know I'm not alone in that. So ever since Star Trek Generations, I was like, holy shit, Malcolm McDowell be Magneto.
Yep.
And so I was kind of heartbroken when he wasn't cast, but then to see Ian McKellen, I was like, oh, okay, never mind. You know, it was like, just kidding. But yeah,
Senator Kelly turned into some sort of water puddle thing.
Yes, he turns into a puddle of goo, and Storm has not a very flattering scene where she essentially runs out of the room screaming, looking for help, which doesn't exactly embody the Storm that, I would envision in my...
Storm seems like the last character that would have that action, even though it wasn't just...
Well, have they really done any version of Storm in these movies that has been anything like what you guys would want from the comics or from even the animated series? That's the one character I feel like they've gotten just like completely wrong in nearly every respect.
It's fucked up because the problem I don't think is Halle Berry, because as much as people
she gets way too much shit from people.
She does. She really does get too much shit. Like, I mean, when she wants, she can act her ass off, and her, Oscar for, what was it, Monsters Ball?
Yeah.
Was well deserved. So,
as was Abyss's Oscar for the Monsters Ball.
Yes.
Why is he not grabbing his temples in this scene is the only thing I want to know. God. Xavier just got hit with the diarrhea.
Where are the concentric circles?
I want to know where...
Screaming about
I want to know where the power, incredible power is.
I want concentric circles coming out of his forehead right now.
Right. We need Kirby dots. We need something here to tell us what's going on.
We've never gotten Kirby dots in a superhero movie.
Not in any superhero movie. I don't think so. Damn.
That's the real race between the two companies to see if DC can get Aquaman concentric circles on screen before Fox gets Xavier's concentric circles on
right. Oh, and here's Cyclops with his
hairy chest Xavier
pep talk and his butt cut from 2000.
I want to circle back to something you mentioned about Cyclops earlier, because I'm also a James Marsden fan. I like the guy. I thought he was. I think he's good in almost everything he does.
He's the best actor who's in the most terrible movies of all time.
Yes, agreed.
Except these movies.
He does okay. He does what he can with what he's given. But I do feel like, to your point about Jim Caviezel, who is anybody who's seen this
Passion
guy
of the Christ.
Yeah, Passion of the Christ, or Persons of Interest, or any of his other movies. Frequency. He is a much more straightforward actor than a guy whose name I'm blanking on that plays Cyclops.
Exactly.
And this guy is more of a comedic actor. Like, if you've seen Marsden in most of his other movies, he's got
Teaching
more.
Mrs. Single, I think, was his biggest credit prior to this.
Yeah, and he's got a good sense of humor and everything, and he does what he can with Cyclops, but I almost feel like the version that they went with of Cyclops would have been better served to go with a more not established, but a more dramatic take on an actor.
Yeah, honestly, I think that part of the problem here is not that he's given limited screen time. It's just he doesn't really mesh with the rest of the cast. I mean, James Marsden is fine in his own right, but the same words coming out of, like you said, Jim Caviezel's mouth in these scenes would have stacked up well, I think, against Hugh Jackman's Wolverine. I think those two could have stood toe-to-toe to each other in a way that James Marsden and Hugh Jackman really couldn't. Like, in these scenes with he and Jackman and Famke Janssen's Jean Grey, you sort of look at it like, why would she choose, Scott over Logan?
Right.
Like, he's so milquetoast. He's so like the Boy Scout. He's even, and not to harp on this, but I mean, he's like a foot shorter than both of them. Hugh Jackman is like 6'5". Famke Janssen, excuse me, is pretty tall.
Raven.
Yes.
The Jim Ross moment of the podcast.
The Jim Ross moment. And, they kind of tower over poor James Marsden here. And while he's a fine actor and he delivers the lines that he's given pretty effectively, I just think they would have been better coming from a more seasoned actor. And I don't think you'd have the problems that you saw in later films of trying to make, this version of Cyclops more of a legitimate character.
And to that point, I think that it's especially evident that if you took Caviezel and you put him up against Logan, you mentioned this earlier, you could have a more even par between them, because we have a lot of fun at each other's expenses about Cyclops versus Wolverine, but even I can acknowledge as a Wolverine fan, it's supposed to be there are supposed to be two sides to it. It's not supposed to be a one-sided confrontation. They're both supposed to have points. They're both supposed to be strong characters. It's one of those things where you actually have a choice to decide, who do I like? Which one do I prefer? And they both serve a function to the team, as opposed to in this situation where, like you said, there are no redeeming qualities for Cyclops versus Wolverine in this movie.
Yeah, let's face it. I mean, Jackman squashes Marston in this movie. He just does. I mean, Marston gets that kind of one good one-liner sort of towards the middle of the movie where he's like, and by the way, stay away from my girl. That sort of worked where he got the last word, but at the same time, you're like, yeah, okay, whatever.
Right.
I even think it would have worked better if it was Marston and, the original choice for Logan of Dougray Scott. I think those two.
Yes, he was less likely to dominate the screen the way that...
Yeah, they could have been on an even playing field, but when you've got Jackman and Marston, it just doesn't work.
I agree.
So, I mean, and that's, no fault to the actors, really. It just... I think that was just shit happens in the casting process, and they ran into conflicts and did what they had to do and made the best of that they could out of a bad situation. We're getting towards the climax here.
The kids in the mansion are nonplussed by things like telepathy and telekinesis and energy blasts, but you fly a jet by them, and man, they've never seen anything like
They're
it.
like, what is this all about?
What the hell is this? Man can fly? What?
We thought we were just here to learn history from, our strange teachers with extraordinary abilities whose teaching qualifications may be a little bit dubious, but nonetheless, that's what we're here for. We're here to learn something, right? We're not a training academy for a militaristic operation by any means.
No, the government has no need to step into the situation.
No.
Interesting that Magneto tells Toad to be on the lookout, because
yes. Well, that's the thing. Like, Toad kicks some ass in this movie.
Who played by Ray Park of Dark
by Ray Park. Yeah, whatever happened to that guy? I mean,
I don't know, but he was hot choreographer at that time.
Well, wasn't he Snake Eyes in the G.I. Joe?
Oh, that's right. He wasn't he?
Yep.
But here again, that's still not saying much, is it?
No.
Right, but I mean, they're fairly recent, semi-big budget, roles for the guy.
But
it's not
off the radar, though. Between 2000 would have been his peak around, right after Phantom Menace and then X-Men. But then he really dropped off the face of the earth for about 8-9 years. He was probably doing fight choreography, I'd imagine, because that's kind of where he got his start. But yeah, he was great. Like as far as action scenes go, he was one of the best going at this time.
And here's a great scene where Wolverine is walking through the metal detector here at Liberty Island and gives Cyclops the
the middle claw,
the old third claw, and Cyclops.
Which I'll give them this to their credit, they could have written Cyclops a lot worse there. You know what I mean? Like
I was going to say towards the end here,
Cyclops and instead he actually showed a sense of humor, which was cool.
They settle into a nice repartee here towards the end where Cyclops is more willing to take a back seat and play the straight man to Wolverine, and I think that kind of worked. And if we'd seen more of that, I think the character would have come off better. But sadly, we really didn't. And now we're getting
Here's the Wolverine versus Wolverine fight.
Yeah. We've got to talk about this. So this throws me in a lot of ways because Mystique morphs into Wolverine down to the point of simulating his claws, which he just sliced off. And she screams in pain. So is this a part of her that he has just cut off? How does that work exactly?
It's always been something that bothered. Even when I watched it the first time, I was like, she shouldn't be able to mimic his claws, or if she can, should not be like hard objects that can cut anything.
Yeah, they should just be like fleshy, whatever.
Fleshy, right? Exactly. So that,
which obviously they were. He just sliced them right.
Just cut them off. Yeah, which is really the only time that we really get to see him truly unleash with his claws in this movie. They would fix that certainly in the second one.
Well, it's funny because the Wolverine fight scenes in this movie kind of scream of Fox mandated. We need to have 2 good showcase fights for Wolverine. So what are our options? Sabretooth, obviously, but what else? I guess Mystique. So we see Mystique as a much more capable physical combatant than she had ever been in the comics, which her credit is nice. However, this scene, which we're witnessing right now, it's really something because it's almost like a wrestling match where she does some stuff, gains an advantage, hits a high move, and then strikes a pose, Like they're going at it back and forth, and it seems like he could take her out at any point, but they've just kind of artificially have to keep this thing going for the sake. Here she is, striking a pose yet again.
Yeah, it feels... watching this, because the movie I've watched a lot more is X2, and it does feel like some of the fight scenes in X2 were almost responses to some of the stuff that they might have gotten wrong on this one, in terms of this fight scene was done much better when it was Lady Deathstrike versus Wolverine.
Exactly.
So yeah, interesting point there, because now she's doing a weird thing where she walks upside down up a pole for some...
Yeah, she kind of slithers up the wall in a way that, I don't know. I guess she can stick to walls in this movie. Who knows?
Who knows?
Fair enough.
Toad does not have the Igor voice that he had in Pride of the X-Men. So.
No, he does not. But
and here it is.
He does have the Loogies of Doom.
Right, which was they gave him a pretty massive power-up, I think, as a matter of necessity, since they cut out, characters like Pyro. So Toad had to take up that slack, and he becomes a real ass kicker since the Brotherhood is a little bit understaffed. But here we go with Storm about to have her big moment. She, after getting her ass whipped for the past 5 minutes, she's now
she's remembered that she's the most powerful person on the team.
right, exactly.
Which in fairness is kind of a trope of almost all superhero media these days.
Yeah,
like
I
they
guess
all
so.
do this. I mean, I love
there
the Flash.
It is.
But
do you want to know what happens to a toad when it's struck by lightning?
The same thing that happens to everything else.
So I remember the theater audibly groaning after that line. They're expecting this big action one-liner comeback, and it's just this, oh, really? That's what she's going to say? So I don't know what your experience was like, but that did not go over well at all.
Yeah, I don't remember. I honestly don't remember it because I don't know that I even took notice of the line until I watched the VHS later. And there, Wolverine has just killed Storm, and I don't remember this part of the movie at all. He's just murdered Storm in cold blood. She's dead. Oh, no, it wasn't Storm after all. Wow.
It wasn't Storm. It was Mystique.
In disguise. Wow. No, I did like that. I like how they, because again, little things like you don't get to see the there's the really good line you referenced earlier.
Yeah, the only other line they kept from Joss Whedon's contribution, which again, Cyclops plays the straight man, and okay, he's good with that.
Yeah, and again, I like that because again, if they were writing him as badly as they wrote him in the first half of the movie, he would be taking it super serious, and he'd be like,
right,
how dare you say that at a time like this, Logan?
Exactly. But now he's settled into a groove. He's kind of, like I said, they've got that tete-a-tete kind of thing. And
I also enjoyed this take in this franchise of Wolverine and Magneto, where Wolverine just basically has no shot in hell of doing anything.
Oh, yeah.
At any point.
They make that very clear.
Magneto makes him his bitch very early in the series.
Mm-hmm.
And you. Just point those claws of yours in a safer direction.
Oh, and here's a reference to them, to the X-Men being rather shitty teachers. Magneto's, again, classic condescension. Oh, yes, a bolt of lightning and a giant copper conductor. I thought you worked at a school.
I love the setup of this scene, like positioning Cyclops where if he even opens his eyes, he's going to blow off the head.
He's going to blow Jean's head off.
I mean, that's great. This is good stuff, man. I have to be honest. You know what? I'm higher on this movie than I remember being the last few times.
Right?
Maybe it's
That's true, because you kind of been poo-pooing it for the better part of 6 or 7 years since we've known it.
Well, I take umbrage with that.
I loved it the first time I saw it in the theater, and then over the years, I think multiple rewatches of it were less kind, but now I'm kind of viewing it, maybe it's the Blu-ray, like cleaning things up a little bit and making the effects not look as bad as they looked on the VHS and the DVD. But
yeah, I'm telling you, the effects on this DVD are like, man, this is so 2000. Like, in a way that I didn't even realize was, like, these were effects in 2000. We're going to get to the Wolverine Sabretooth fight, which I watched just a little bit before getting on this call, and I'm like, okay, there is no way this looked as bad as it does on the Blu-ray. I'm like, holy shit. But we're not there yet. So
it's interesting to think about, though, because like I think that this rewatch, what it's done is it's made me appreciate some of the things about this movie that have kind of fallen out of fashion since then. Like the fact it drops you into the middle of them being the X-Men and doesn't overly explain how they came to be and all that. Like the fact that it takes its time more with like building the conflict and really building to a crescendo of the conflict. I feel like a lot, and that's not to say I love the modern superhero movies. They've evolved so much in so many ways, but there is a little bit of an element of character attend for the hero characters in particular, and interaction that is kind of nice to see in this movie, and how it works around its limitations in a lot of impressive ways that I think today movies sometimes take advantage of their lack of limitations, if that makes sense.
Well, and I think something else that doesn't get enough credit in this movie, twist of the whole time it's setting you up for Magneto wants Wolverine for something. And that's what everyone, regardless of your familiarity with the X-Men as a concept or not, is kind of, primed to expect. Like if you're a casual moviegoer, you're like, the protagonist here is Wolverine. Magneto wants him for something. If you're a big-time X-Men fan coming into this movie thinking, what are they going to do? How are they going to handle it? Okay, Magneto obviously wants Wolverine for something because Wolverine is the most important X-Man, so to speak. And then they turn it on its head by, that great scene we were talking about in the train station where Magneto has that confrontation with Wolverine and Rogue, and he's like, telling Wolverine, who said I wanted anything with you, and just casually dismisses him, and that it's really Rogue that he's after. And so that's a twist that works on every level, whether you're hardcore, comic book fan, X-Men fan coming into this movie, or you're just, a casual film goer. And that's just something I loved about this movie was how they did that twist in a way that was really logical. They made it work. It didn't invalidate anything that they had set up before. It's like, oh, there's no reason to think he actually wanted Wolverine. That's just my prejudices,
assumptions,
influencing my, coloring of this movie. So I thought that was great. That was a great plot twist.
I agree. On the negative side, that was a laughably bad scene where Sabretooth threw Wolverine and he worked his way around the crown of the Statue of Liberty.
Oh yeah, that was rough. That was rough.
And I remember, and that's not a retroactive thing either, because I remember at the time thinking that, like, when my friends and I were talking about it at school the next week, we were like at the lunch table, we were like, okay, let's talk about some of the negative stuff, and that was like talked about the just awkward physics of that entire fight scene, like,
yeah, yeah, really. That's something that I don't think the Blu-ray even redeemed was his.
No, it did not.
Pivoting on the spike of the Lady Liberty crown. Oh, now this is pretty cool. Where Cyclops shoots Sabretooth out the Statue of Liberty. Oh, yeah, Wolverine just pitches the visor at him, and he takes him out.
Yeah.
Breaks Magneto's boat.
I feel like we needed a scene with Magneto where he's a little upset that his plan didn't work, but he's mainly upset that he has to get a new boat.
Yeah, I feel like he sort of conveyed that in his reaction. He's more upset over the boat than he is.
He should have assumed. They should have had. If I was writing it, he would just assume that Toad caused it.
Right.
Master, I'm sorry.
You fucking underling.
They just should have made Pride of the X-Men into a live-action movie.
God.
I don't know about that one.
Based on some of his earlier scripts, it seems like they weren't far off from that. But anyway, this was the only scene that I thought was a bit... Okay, so Storm's got to levitate. It's like this movie's depiction of the fastball special,
right?
Colossus, right? So
that's what I was thinking. Yep.
So Storm's got to use her weather wind manipulation powers to levitate Wolverine, but Jean's going to steady him. Why doesn't Jean just do all the heavy lifting here? I don't think it's asking too much of her to just casually levitate Wolverine up into exactly the position he needs to.
Then again, we are X-Men fans, Tim, and how many times have we seen a telekinetic character for reason that has previously taken on interstellar warships collapse under the weight of trying to lift a boulder or something?
Exactly.
And there's Rogue getting her Matt Hardy streak.
Oh yeah. Exactly.
It's not over.
The stress of the situation has just become too much for her.
That's what happened to Hal Jordan in the 80s. The stress became too much, and he
oh my God! It all ties back to Green.
The gray temples, yeah.
Which all goes back to my character of Mr. Fantastic.
Which to be fair, Hal had a pretty stressful time in the 80s, what with fucking a 16-year-old.
She may have been younger than that, my friend.
Or older, depending on...
Or older, yes.
We would have to go back to our 5-hour Green Lantern Spectacular.
Which I attempted to do the other day.
Oh, why? Why did
the
you do
last
that?
time we almost got canceled.
It starts out pretty good. Like, the first hour is really good and informative, and you guys are talking about Golden Age and Silver Age stuff, and Gerard Jones and Steve Englehart and all these other random people. And then, at a certain point, you can just tell when at a certain point, it turns into a back-and-forth cyclical Civil War debate between you two, where you both literally make the same arguments, saying the exact same word over
Did we
and
do
over.
that on the Green Lantern?
Why were we even talking about Civil War on a Green Lantern?
I don't know. It just
man.
so at some point, Nick, in your state, you just decided to manufacture an argument about Civil War.
In my state too, in all fairness.
And Tim's state too. And Tim's state was such that it would be like, well, and I think from my perspective, and then you'd come back and say the exact same thing, and then you'd come back and say the exact same thing. It basically added up to an amazing tapestry of a point in our lives. You know, like you could just picture what each of us looked like during the podcast. Nick with the exasperated, drunken, smirk. Tim with the drunken smirk. Me with my face buried in my hands as the time ticked away from life. It was a great.
Passed out on his keyboard.
Yeah, it was a great time. Here we see Wolverine splayed out on something, and
Statue of Liberty.
The cops are there investigating the scene.
Well, and that's the thing. The X-Men kind of just cut and run here. They leave Magneto to the very human authorities who we've already seen are out of their depth, even though, that scene earlier, I don't think I can stop them all, Charles.
They just assume everything goes to plan.
They do.
And Xavier woke up. How convenient.
Yeah, and Wolverine's...
Right after the closing battle. In true
Xavier fashion, the first expression on his face is a cocky smirk.
Yeah, really. That is one thing I was a little bit disappointed by in this movie is that they sidelined Xavier in the way they... you get Patrick Stewart, who was everybody's first casting choice. I mean, there's no one on the planet who didn't want to see Patrick Stewart as Professor X. I didn't hear anyone else ever even come up in, casual conversations. You get that, and then you sideline him for half the movie. It's sort of, which I understand. I mean, he is very powerful and by all rights should be able to pretty much solve the problem in half the runtime here of this movie, save for Magneto's telepathy blocking helmet. But still, it just kind of sucks to see him sidelined like that. And it was sort of like they had a chance to redeem it in X2, and they totally didn't. And then in X3, they kill him. And it's like, come the fuck on. You got Patrick Stewart as Professor X. Do it right. What the people?
I mean...
That's kind of like why it looks like we may get... I mean, it's weird, but we're 16 years in at this point, and it looks like that third Wolverine movie may have more Xavier in it than any of the other movies combined.
I mean...
Like from what I understand, he's going to play a pretty major role in that film. It looks like,
and I'd be on board with that. I mean, if they could finally, get their money's worth out of this guy, honestly, because I don't know why they've seen fit to give so little for him to do in these movies. Because,
and he's so good when he's there. I mean, I love him in the mentor role to these characters. Mm-hmm. And even in X2, they took the board and kind of used him as the plot device of the villain.
I know, right?
But the bit while he's there is very good, where he's he has the conversation with Eric, even at the end of this movie, and it's it's he's great while he's there, but they really haven't given. And I think that's kind of one trappings of Xavier as a character. 'Cause even in the comics, they've struggled at times over the years to make him a.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in fairness, they've taken him off the board in the comics too for the same reasons. Yeah. He's just too powerful, so you have to send him off into space for him.
Or you have to do what the cartoon did, and you make him laughably weak.
Right. No suggestion that he was the most powerful mutant on Earth.
No, Proteus is...
Preliminary coroner report seemed to indicate that Gyrich was mauled by a bear.
Yes. Just a throwaway line, yeah.
It reminds me of, Tim, have you ever seen Dirty Work, the Norm Macdonald movie?
Probably a long time ago. I doubt I'm going to get whatever your reference is going to be.
There's a bit at the end of the movie where he's talking about Chevy Chase's character who plays a doctor, and he's like, it's the crux of his story arc was that doctor had a gambling issue that he had from betting on Mr. T at the end of Rocky III, And so at the very end of the movie, they're doing the cheesy narration where Norm kind of sets up what everybody's new status quo is. He's like, well, so-and-so got the house back, and I got the girl, and we settled down and all that. And as for Dr. whatever his name is, well, it turns out that he owed even more money than we thought he did, so the mob came out and killed him. So he's dead. All right, that's it.
Very good.
And here's the
and so here we go with Wolverine riding off.
Yeah, I was going to say Wolverine kind of popularized the leather on denim on leather on denim on leather on denim look prior to 2000's Triple H, didn't he?
Yes, that's probably where Hunter got it from.
Maybe he
did.
did.
There's even a scene earlier in this movie where he has his denim jacket on and he throws his leather jacket on over top of it to go look for Rose.
So you know, in a roundabout fashion, do we have this movie to blame for Triple H's entire career, essentially?
I think we do. Yeah, I really think we do. I mean,
and here's the line about pity for the poor soul who comes to the school looking for trouble that they just reused in Apocalypse.
Which
is
cool.
By
which is cool.
instead.
Which I actually didn't pick up on in Apocalypse, so I'm glad you mentioned that.
Boy, it's funny how Michael Fassbender managed to not each day in 20 plus years, but in the intervening 20 years, he's now in the 70s.
Well, to be fair, this movie no longer exists technically in the
that
in
is
the
very
timeline.
true.
Isn't that the reading of it?
They need to do. You know how they did the road cut of Days of Future Past?
Mm-hmm.
They need to do the Days of Future retcon version of this X-Men film, where the first time Xavier meets Logan, he goes, "You know, you told me to fuck off in 1962. I tried to help you."
I have got to hear Ian McKellen deliver that line. Help you?
As I recall, you told me to fuck off, so I want nothing from you. And then he glances down at Rogue. Oh, no.
And the credits roll.
For some reason, my old man Magneto sounds like Tom Brokaw. You told me to fuck off back in 1966.
Wolverine told me to fuck off.
And Gerald Ford is dead. So we have
made it through the...
We watched the whole fucking movie.
We sure...
It was only, to be fair, I think this was only about an hour. Minus
dude,
credits,
this was a blast. This was an absolute blast.
Yeah, I'm looking at 1:35 on my time clock.
I haven't watched this movie.
A lot shorter than your average superhero epics these days. Some of them, get up over the 2 hour mark.
It just goes to show how little faith Fox had in this thing. They gave it no budget and very little runtime. They were like, you know what? Make the most of it. If you make us $1, we'll be happy.
I can just see the producer in the editing room pointing to his watch as he's looking at Singer. All right, come on now. Tighten it up.
Now, one thing I am noticing here on the Wikipedia page, Terrence Stamp was considered for the role of Magneto.
Oh, man.
So
I can see it.
We talked about Malcolm McDowell. I don't see his name in official conversations, but I'm glad that we're on the same page.
Would have been an interesting choice.
Terrence Stamp. Can you imagine?
Zod.
Oh, my goodness. I don't think it would have been an upgrade, but that would have been interesting.
It would have been interesting. And I could, he might have pulled it off. And then they could have encased Magneto in cellophane.
Yes, exactly. To him, yes. Instead of the plastic prison, he could have been imprisoned in cellophane.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're almost at the end of our episode here. It's been
wait.
Something crashing.
We've got considered for Storm, Janet Jackson, or...
What?
Yep, Janet Jackson or Angela Bassett. How about that?
Wow, Angela Bassett, who would go on to, if I'm not mistaken, Nick, play Amanda Waller in the
Amanda Waller in Green Lantern.
I tell you what,
you ought to love this line from the Wikipedia page, Tim. Talking about Marsden, it says Marsden modeled his performance similar to.
Yes, I read that earlier. Just to know where that was coming from. Yeah. I tell you what, though, Angela Bassett was connected to Storm like as early as the 1994 treatments, and if you've ever seen her in a movie I'm a big booster for, Strange Days, which is fucking awesome.
Movie.
Yeah, Catherine Bigelow, a very flawed movie. I will agree with every criticism that's ever been said of that film, but I just fucking love it to death. Yeah. Angela Bassett walks away with that movie, and to see her as Storm was, there were so many people who were like, this is a disservice, and they not put Angela Bassett in this role. And I think it was one of those, oh, she's too old, now we have to go with the Hollywood it girl of Halle Berry, and that's where a lot of that consternation came from. You know, it wasn't so much that Halle Berry was a shit actor, it was that she wasn't Angela Bassett. I do remember that now, and looking back on some of these casting rumors. But, oh well, in another life.
Definitely. Well, Tim, thank you so much for joining us for this. This has been an absolute blast. I haven't seen this movie in quite a while, so this was really cool for me, and also to share some of our mutual memories of seeing this for the first time, and the development process and all that. Well, yeah, thanks for coming on, man.
Absolutely, yeah. If it's anything X-Men, I'll be down for it. So,
and perhaps
anytime, my brothers.
Perhaps we should do a similar project for our discussed about Batman and Robin watching at some point in the future. That could be fun. I have a feeling.
Perhaps we should. I think I might even have the Blu-ray of that. Oh my god.
I do have the Blu-ray, and actually, if you're interested at all in like the makings of those Batman movies, I actually highly recommend the Blu-ray set, the quadrilogy or whatever they call it, the Batman anthology.
Yeah, I think I have that thing.
And it's got, each one of them has like an hour to an hour and a half long documentary about the making of it, and Schumacher actually pretty much apologizes for Batman and Robin during that documentary. Yeah. So, at the very least, it's worth checking out those for the documentary.
All right, well, that's good to know. I may have plans for the weekend now. It's as sad as that may or may not sound.
No sadder than the weekend of catching up on Daredevil and watching wrestling. So,
what's really funny is if you watch the documentary for Batman '89, the three different screenwriters who did passes of the draft all attempt to blame the other screenwriters for the Alfred Let's Get the Batcave scene. Nobody will take credit for it.
That bad, huh?
Yeah.
So, with all that being said, folks, we're going to let you know what we got coming down the line. Next week, we've got the rundown, the return of our news and notes round in the world of comics. That'll be coming your way next week. And then in 2 weeks' time, I believe that we're coming back with the Long Book Hunters, which will address the Warren Ellis and Brian Hitch book, The Authority, which I recently read for the first time, and Nick will be reading for the first time in the very near future. So be on the lookout for those. Anything else folks should be aware of, Nick?
Not that I can think of at the moment, mainly because I can't remember what all we have planned. So no is my answer to that.
The as always, on Place to Be Nation Pop, you can find all of the things that you need.
I got one. I'll throw out, Greg. I just remembered one. Coming up the first weekend in August, the next time we do, or the first week in August, the next time we do an Off the Page, actually, we're going to be taking a look at the recently released Batman v Superman Ultimate Edition. And dear Lord, if we actually watch that entire movie, I'm pretty sure we'll want to kill ourselves at the end of that podcast. So let's hope
that will not happen.
Sit through
we will watch it before that, and we will not get through the entire thing. But we will also be releasing here on this the PTBN Pop feed in the very near future, the ultimate extended R-rated edition of the Haffey Awards. So be on the lookout for that.
Actually, I think it was already R-rated. So we're releasing the NC-17
what did we leave on the
version.
cutting room floor there? Oh my goodness!
The NC-17 version will feature an extended dialogue about autoerotic asphyxiation and increased discussion over the age of Tom Holland.
Oh gosh, we didn't. All right. Well, I guess I'll be bidding farewell to Place to Be Nation, and
for the next 10 to 15
For the
years.
record, Tom Holland really doesn't do anything for me. I was just trying to help Stephanie out. Feel like I did. It was public service.
I feel like we all learned something.
She was equally uncomfortable and was just acknowledging that, and I think it just came off badly because we came off badly. On that note, I'll be looking forward to your Batman v Superman Ultimate Edition off the page. I need to see that cut for myself. Kind of looking forward to it. I'm a huge fan of the movie, but be that as it may.
Yep.
I will be checking it out in advance of your review. Again, I will try to post some links to some things sort of in the spirit of an as mentioned as like Jay and Miles Explain the X-Men do on that fantastic podcast, which is not part of the Place to Be Nation family of podcasts, but is very...
Oh, please tell me they spell it as explain.
Oh, of course they do. Yeah, their website is actually explaintheXmen.com.
Yes, you should listen to them explain Executioner's song.
They're getting to that. They're not quite there yet, but it's coming probably. Well, at this rate, we're into the 90s, and they're covering like a series, one arc of one series a week. So, you know, the 90s being what they were with the glut of X releases, it'll probably be another year before they honestly get to Executioner's song. But definitely check out Jay and Miles Explain the X-Men, and check out all of the wonderful podcasts that are part of Place to Be Nation Pop. That's right. We've got Pop. There's a cornucopia of comics podcasts that I have been kind of a vagabond on recently, just roaming from one to another. So it's been a pleasure to be here with you guys. I enjoyed talking some old school X-Men with Russell Sellers on Sellers Points with Ben Morris, and the infamous Haffey Awards for 2016, not to be outdone. So assuming we haven't gotten canceled, more of that in store for your future.
Absolutely. And Tim, I'm going to warn you right now, if you're going to any airports in the near future, the fans are talking about it at all the airports.
The fans are talking. We threw the format out the window. It was the greatest night in the history of our profession. I think that goes without saying.
Well, I mean, while you guys are on the topic, I know it's a ways down the road, but we might want to tease, Greg. We may or may not have maybe putting the band back together, so to speak, in September for another giant size edition. But we'll have more details.
Let's
on
just
that down
say,
the road.
any of you fans out there who may be prepping for some of your, for some recreational football-related online activities in the near future, you may want to prep for something along those lines. That's all we're gonna say for now. But with all that being said, we thank you all for listening. We hope you had as much fun as we did talking about the Bryan Singer film X-Men. We're going to come back next week with the rundown. Be sure to tune in for that. And if you want to follow us on Twitter, I am at gphillips8652. Nick is at nickduke87. Tim is at Psyche, CYKE 68. Is that correct?
That is correct. Thank you, sir.
And you can follow us on there. And please, by all means, come on out to facebook.com/PTBN Comics, Place to Be Nation Comics. It's a great page. We do a lot of discussion on there. Post up images. I just posted up images of my very first comic book that I bought when I was a kid, and my mom bought for me.
Me too. That was a great thread.
Yep. So be sure to head out there and stay tuned next week, and we'll come right back with more Hard-Traveling Fanboys.